Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you've found your way here tonight, maybe your thoughts are still racing, or maybe you just want a quiet story to drift alongside. Either way, you're in the right place. Whether you're lying in bed, letting sleep slowly approach, or listening softly while cooking, studying, or working through the night, this is your moment to slow down and wander back in time with me. Tonight, we're not chasing fantasy, but something deeply human: morality. Those invisible rules that tell us what's right, what's wrong, and how to treat one another. Did we invent morality as a cultural tool, a kind of social contract to keep the peace? Or is it something far older, something our species inherited as an instinct from the long arc of evolution? We don't pretend to have all the answers. What we do have are the clues. Stories from anthropology, psychology, and evolutionary science that help us ask better questions. And if you happen to drift off while listening, don't worry. This is a safe place for wandering minds, and sleep is always welcome here. I've left timestamps in the description so you can return tomorrow and pick up right where you left off, because this entire journey from the first question to the last is worth hearing. And if you enjoy this kind of quiet, long-form exploration, gentle science for curious sapiens, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps this calm little corner of the internet reach others who might be searching for the same thing. I'd also love to know, how do you listen? Are you lying in bed at the end of the day, or keeping company with these words during a night shift somewhere far away? And as always, stay curious, stay calm. A wounded monkey sits motionless at the edge of the troop. Its stillness is a stark contrast to the usual chaotic scramble for food and status. Then, another individual approaches. There is no food in its hands, no obvious gain to be had. It simply sits, gently licks the injury, and pulls the suffering creature close in a quiet embrace. No reward is given, no thanks are offered. This moment of pure, unasked-for consolation hangs in the air, a silent question mark, against the backdrop of a world so often defined by survival of the fittest. Is this the first lesson in morality, a primitive glimmer of something we now call goodness? Or is it merely a more complex expression of an ancient biological script? Within the realm of biology, this act is not entirely mysterious. In species like bonobos, such empathetic behaviors are well documented. An individual will comfort a distressed peer, a gesture that seems to soothe both the receiver and the giver. Scientists point to a potent little molecule, oxytocin. Often dubbed the love hormone or the cuddle chemical, it facilitates bonding, trust, and a desire for closeness. It is a biological incentive for connection, a reward system for prosocial behavior that strengthens the group, the ultimate vehicle for survival. This suggests that the impulse to be kind, to offer solace, might be woven into our very DNA, a hardwired predisposition that gave our ancestors a collective edge. The plot deepens when we dig into the earth itself. In the Shanidar cave in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal man who lived over 45,000 years ago. His body told a story of a hard life. A crushing blow to the head that likely blinded him, a withered arm, and a crippled leg. Yet he lived for years after these devastating injuries. His survival was mathematically impossible without help. He must have been fed, protected, and cared for by others in his group. This was not a fleeting moment of comfort. It was a long-term investment in a life that offered no immediate return to the hunters and gatherers. It was a cost they chose to bear. This act of care stretches far beyond a simple biological instinct. It hints at a profound shared value placed on a life, even a broken one. We modern humans celebrate kindness and compassion as virtues, as choices that elevate us above our baser instincts. We award prizes for altruism and write stories about heroes. Yet, we seldom pause to consider that the very engine for this praise might be a million-year-old evolutionary heirloom. Our admiration for a good deed might itself be a learned response to an ancient internal nudge, a sophisticated echo of that same oxytocin-fueled impulse that compelled one monkey to comfort another. We have built cathedrals of philosophy upon a foundation that is profoundly, humblingly animal. But if morality is simply instinct, a biological program running in the background, why is it not the universal law of the natural world? The animal kingdom is a theater of breathtaking brutality alongside stunning cooperation. If it is all just evolution, then compassion is no more good than predation is evil. They are simply strategies that work in different contexts. This reduces our lofty concepts of right and wrong to a random portfolio of successful behaviors, a cosmic accident of adaptation. Can the profound human struggle with ethics truly be explained by the same processes that dictate the hunting patterns of a shark or the symbiotic dance of a fungus and a tree? The randomness seems too hollow, too cold, to contain the fiery human passion for justice. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing between instinct and learning, but in understanding where one begins to morph into the other. That first impulse to care, the lick on a wound, the shared food, may be the raw, biological material. But what happens when that material is shaped by experience, by memory, by the dawning awareness of another's mind? The journey from a feeling to a principle is a long one. To trace its path, we must move from the comfort of the embrace to the tense, competitive arena where the first notions of fairness were forged, not in the language of compassion, but in the harsh arithmetic of survival. If the seed of morality is a biological impulse, what was the first pressure that made it grow into a rule? This leads us to a rather unexpected place, the extravagant, seemingly wasteful beauty of a peacock's feather. In that world, fairness is a foreign concept. The most magnificent male wins everything, leaving the plain ones with nothing. How, then, did our ancestors begin to trade the stark law of the jungle for the delicate, fragile idea of a level playing field? What force could possibly convince a creature to accept less than it could take? The plain-looking male rarely catches the eye of a potential mate. In the wild, his existence is a quiet testament to a harsh biological truth. To be unremarkable is often to be overlooked. Yet, somewhere along the branching path of human evolution, a new and peculiar idea began to take root, one that would slowly complicate this simple, brutal arithmetic of attraction. It was the first faint whisper of fairness, a notion that would eventually demand that value be found not just in the vibrant spectacle of a feather, but in the invisible depths of a soul. Consider the peacock, a living jewel. His magnificent train is not mere decoration. It is a billboard written in the language of genes. Each iridescent eye spot is a boast, a declaration of survival. It screams to the discerning female that its bearer is strong, parasite-free, and resourceful enough to waste energy on such extravagant beauty. This is sexual selection in its purest form, a brutal, beautiful marketplace where the currency is genetic promise. For humans, the marketplace is infinitely more complex. We, too, are drawn to the equivalent of the peacock's feather, the symmetry of a face, the strength of a form. These are the ancient instinctual whispers we still carry. But we began to listen to another, quieter voice. We started to value things that leave no fossil, things that cannot be seen. Kindness, loyalty, courage, wisdom. We began to choose mates not merely for the strength they could pass on, but for the moral world we could build together. The selection was no longer just biological. It had become profoundly ethical. This shift from the visible to the invisible finds a silent, powerful echo in the dust of ancient graves. Archaeology reveals a poignant truth about our early societies. In a world governed by the raw struggle for existence, we find skeletons, those of the frail, the sick, the old, carefully laid to rest alongside the strong and the young. They were not cast out, left for the scavengers as a drain on the tribe's resources. They were buried with a tenderness that suggests they were valued, cared for, and mourned. This ritual is a crack of light in a dark world. It is a physical testament to a community making a choice that defies the immediate logic of survival. It is the first concrete evidence of a contract being written, an unspoken agreement that a person's worth extends beyond their physical utility, that they belong simply because they are one of us. This ancient impulse has, in our modern age, exploded into a global chorus. Our drive for fairness has stretched far beyond the burial ground. We now have movements that champion the rights of those who, by nature's old rules, would have been left behind. Movements for gender and racial equality, for disability rights, for social justice. We craft laws and build institutions in a conscious, relentless effort to create a world that is not merely strong, but just. It seems we are in a constant, active rebellion against our own deepest instincts, using the very mind that evolution gave us to build a cage for its baser impulses. We are attempting to outgrow our own nature. But is that truly what is happening? Or have we simply become more sophisticated in our selections? The peacock's feather is an honest signal, but in the human social jungle, signals can be faked. Does our modern virtue signal a genuine moral transformation? Or is it just a new, more intricate plumage, a way to demonstrate social intelligence, tribal loyalty, and access to resources in a different kind of mating dance? Is our proclaimed fairness just a polished, complex form of social selection, a way to prove we are the most enlightened and therefore the most fit in a new hierarchy? Has the currency simply changed from genetic promise to social capital? The answer to this tension, perhaps, lies not in our acts of care, but in our capacity for violence. For the same species that carefully buries its weak is also the species that kills on a scale and for reasons unknown to any other creature. We do not merely kill for food or territory, we kill for ideas. We kill for a god, for a flag, for honor, for a perceived slight against an abstract concept of justice. In these moments of conflict, the invisible world we built, the world of morals and ethics, becomes the very reason we destroy the physical one. The same profound mind that conceived of fairness for the weak can also conceive of righteous extermination for the other. So, where does this leave us? If our morality is just a new arena for an old game of selection, what does that make an act of kindness? And if it is a genuine transcendence, why does it so easily justify its opposite? The thread of fairness is tangled with another darker thread, pulling us toward a more disturbing paradox. We learn to care for the weak, but we also learn to kill for a cause. We bury our dead with reverence, yet we have, throughout our history, made others dead to bury. This forces a question that cuts to the very core of what it means to be human. When we kill not for a meal, but for a belief, is that the ultimate abandonment of instinct? Or is it, in its own terrifying way, the birth of a new, more dangerous morality? 30,000 years ago, the last of the Neanderthals vanished from the earth. The world, once shared by multiple kinds of human, now belonged to one. Us, Homo sapiens. We were the inheritors. In the silent, cold caves of Eurasia, we find their bones and we find our own. And in those same caves, we find the first fragile evidence of something that seems to contradict our very nature. Not just evidence of death, but evidence of care. The bones of one individual are arranged with a quiet intention, sprinkled with red ochre, a stone tool placed gently by the hand. Here, in the same creature, lay the capacity to extinguish a rival and the desire to honor a friend. This is the ancient, silent scream of a paradox that still lives within us. Are we born to kill or born to mourn? From a biological vantage point, the story seems brutally simple. Violence is a thread woven deep into the fabric of life. Competition is the engine of evolution. To kill another, for food, for territory, for a mate, for the simple removal of a threat, is a strategy as old as life itself. It is a dark arithmetic of survival, where the success of one gene pool is measured by the failure of another. This is not malice, it is mechanics. The strong survive, the weak perish, and the world moves on, indifferent. Our ancestors, fighting for a foothold on a harsh planet, would have known this calculus in their bones. The drive to dominate, to secure resources, to eliminate competition is a legacy written in our very DNA, a whisper from a world where mercy had no calorie value and compassion offered no shelter from the storm. Is our violence, then, just an evolutionary heirloom, a ghost in our machine that we can never truly exorcise? But the earth tells a more complicated story. At a place called Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a grave site from 13,000 years ago holds the remains of men, women, and children. Many of the bones bear the unmistakable marks of violent death, the sharp, precise wounds from projectile points. This was not a hunt. This was a conflict, a battle, perhaps a massacre. It is a stark testament to our ancient capacity for organized killing. Yet, in countless other sites across the globe, we see a different hand at work. We find graves where bodies were carefully arranged in the sleep of eternity, adorned with beads carved from ivory, surrounded by polished stone axes too precious to discard, their resting places dusted with pollen from flowers that had no practical use but beauty and remembrance. The same hands that could wield a club to shatter a skull could also arrange a blossom on a grave. How do we reconcile the club with the cradle, the weapon with the wreath? This paradox did not fade with the Stone Age. It merely put on new clothes. Today, we live in societies that hold life as the most sacred of values. And yet, the highest authority of these same societies, the state, retains the ultimate power to end it. A court of law, after a solemn ritual of deliberation, can condemn a person to death. The act of killing is framed not as a primal urge, but as a moral necessity. It is killing in the name of justice, for the protection of the whole, to balance some cosmic scale. We sanitize the violence, distance ourselves from the act, but the fundamental equation remains. We believe that some killings are right. Is this the highest expression of our ethics, or merely the most sophisticated justification for our ancient instincts? Does morality provide a check on our violence, or does it simply give it a permission slip? This forces a difficult question. If morality and brutality are not opposites, but have evolved together, walking side by side through our history, what is their relationship? Is our profound sense of right and wrong merely a convenient tool, a psychological mechanism to legitimize the violence we were already going to commit? A way to paint our primal urges in the noble colors of righteousness? Or is it something else entirely? Perhaps morality is not the opposite of violence, but its necessary counterweight, a cultural invention that emerged precisely because we are so capable of harm. Did we create gods and laws and codes of honor not to deny our nature but to cage it? To build a fragile dam against a river of innate aggression, allowing us to live together without tearing each other apart? To untangle this knot, we must look closer, beyond the grand theories and into the intimate evidence. We must examine the cracks in ancient bone and the shadows cast in deep caves. We must search for the moment not of justification, but of hesitation. For the first flicker of a feeling that something was not right, that a line had been crossed, that the dead demanded more than just being left behind. The answer may not lie in a triumphant declaration of ethics, but in a quiet, awkward act performed in the dark. What does the first apology look like, etched in stone and buried for millennia? Deep in a cave in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain, the earth holds a secret that is both brutal and tender. The air is cool and still, heavy with the silence of millennia. In the darkness, nestled amongst the bones of bears and other long-vanished creatures, lies a human skull. It is old, impossibly old, a relic from a time when our species shared the world with others now lost to memory. But it is not its age that makes it whisper to us across the vast chasm of time. It is the story etched into its very bone. 2 precise crushing blows delivered to the head with lethal force, most likely by the same handheld stone tool. The violence is unambiguous, a sudden furious end in a world defined by survival. Yet the story does not end with this act of violence. The same hands that wielded the weapon, or perhaps others from the same group, then carried this broken body. They did not discard it. They did not leave it to the elements or to scavengers. Instead, they performed a deliberate, difficult act. They transported the corpse deep into the cave system to a place known today as Cima de los Huesos, the pit of the bones. There, they laid it to rest amongst dozens of others, a communal grave 500,000 years old. This is the paradox that reaches out from the deep past, a clear act of killing, followed by what can only be described as an act of care. A club, and then a cradle. It forces upon us a difficult, profound question. When, in the long twilight of our becoming, did the first flicker of conscience stir? Did our capacity for profound cruelty and our yearning for reverence emerge from the same dark, fertile ground? To understand this duality, we must first look beyond ourselves, into the wider animal kingdom from which we emerged. Among our primate cousins, violence is a stark and present reality. A troop of chimpanzees will patrol the borders of its territory, and a confrontation with a rival group can escalate into a lethal raid. An alpha male might brutally assault a challenger to maintain his dominance, a display of power that is as political as it is physical. In these moments, the line between predator and prey blurs within the same species. This intraspecies violence is not madness. It is a strategy, a cold calculus of evolutionary gain, securing resources, eliminating competition, ensuring genetic legacy. It is a deeply ingrained thread in the fabric of life, a potential that resides within the very biology we inherited. If this is our foundation, then the act of killing at Cima de los Huesos requires no grand explanation. It could simply be the ancient, primate impulse to resolve conflict with ultimate finality. But if that were the entire story, why carry the body away? Why the collective, cumbersome effort? The violence finds an echo in nature. The care that follows does not. This is where the silent testimony of the pit of bones becomes deafening. This is not a single act of violence lost to time. It is a collection. The remains of at least 28 individuals, heaped together in this remote, difficult-to-access chamber. The evidence suggests they were not dumped there by a catastrophe like a flood or a fall. They were placed there, deliberately, over what was likely a considerable span of time. This transforms a single murder into a potential ritual, a practice. It suggests a community grappling with the implications of death itself. Was this a place of honor? A sacred ossuary where the bones of the group's members were gathered to be with their own kind for eternity? Or was it a place of atonement, a hidden cleft where the consequences of violence within the group were laid to rest, out of sight but not out of mind? The careful placement of the bodies hints at a shared understanding, a proto-ritual that acknowledged a life lost and a debt incurred. It suggests that long before cathedrals or scriptures, the deepest caves served as the first chapels, and the placement of a body was the first prayer. And perhaps this ancient impulse is not so foreign to us after all. In our modern world, we see echoes of this same conflicted conscience. A nation that wages war will later build memorials to its own fallen, and sometimes even to the enemies it killed, etching names in stone to wrest meaning from the carnage. An individual who causes a tragic accident may dedicate their life to a cause related to their victim, a lifelong penance to quiet a relentless internal guilt. We perform funerals. We send flowers. We speak words of eulogy over those we loved, and sometimes over those we wronged. These are the sophisticated cultural expressions of a need that seems profoundly ancient, to acknowledge the rupture caused by death, to mend the tear in the social fabric, to balance the scales. The grief and guilt we feel today may not be modern inventions, but rather the refined, conscious evolution of a deep-seated emotional response that first flickered to life in the shadows of a place like Cima de los Huesos. Is conscience, then, not the opposite of our violent nature, but its necessary counterpart? A psychological tool that evolved to manage the immense social damage that our own intelligence and capacity for violence could create? But we must be cautious. The temptation is to project our own complex emotions and moral frameworks onto these ancient bones, to weave a story we find comforting or meaningful. The skeptical voice, a necessary guide in this journey into the past, urges restraint. What if we are seeing patterns where none exist? The placement of the bodies in the pit could be purely practical, a way to dispose of corpses to avoid attracting predators to a living site, a simple act of sanitation devoid of any spiritual weight. The collective nature of the grave might not indicate a shared ritual, but merely a convenient dumping ground used over generations. And the care we perceive could be a misinterpretation of taphonomy, the natural processes of decay and geological movement over 500,000 years. Perhaps the concept of remorse, of guilt, of a moral reckoning is a luxury of a much later consciousness, a cultural innovation that arrived with language and complex society. Could it be that the individual who dealt those two killing blows felt nothing we would recognize as regret, their mind a landscape of immediate needs and impulses, untouched by the abstract weight of sin or ethics? Is the story of Cima de los Huesos a profound truth, or are we simply hearing the echo of our own hopes in the silence of the past? Let us sit with this ambiguity, for it is the source of its power. The skull from Cima de los Huesos does not give us answers. It presents us with an irreducible mystery, the simultaneous capacity for brutal violence and tender regard, fossilized in the same moment. If this is indeed one of the earliest glimpses of a moral sense awakening, a conscience born not from purity, but from the bloody aftermath of a wrong, then it forces a staggering consideration. How did this feeling, this nascent understanding of wrong, translate into a shared concept of right for a species without words to articulate it? How do you teach a lesson about the value of a life you have just taken? The answer likely wasn't written in a law book or preached from a pulpit. It was felt and shared in the most fundamental human space. Perhaps the first classroom was the circle of firelight, and the first lessons were told not with words, but with a glance toward the dark mouth of a sacred cave, and a story etched in the silent language of memory and loss. And if the genesis of right and wrong began in the shadow of violence, could its most powerful expression be found in an act of pure, selfless love? What happens when the club is dropped? Not in guilt, but in sacrifice. The Alaskan wilderness holds its breath in a silence so deep it feels like a primal memory. Here, the rules are written not in language but in action, in the stark arithmetic of survival. A mother grizzly, a mountain of muscle and instinct, catches the scent of intruders. They are too close to the den, too close to the soft, mewling lives hidden within the earth. There is no malice in her, only a singular, overwhelming imperative. She charges. The confrontation is a brutal, one-sided affair against superior force. It is not a fight she can win. And yet, in her dying, she writes a parable older than any scripture. Her sacrifice is not a considered choice, but a biological certainty. The cubs, hidden and silent, live on. This is the raw, unspoken contract of existence, a life for a life, a death for a future. It is a story we feel in our bones, a narrative of sacrifice so profound it seems to transcend the natural order. But does it? Or is this the very engine of nature itself, disguised in the hauntingly beautiful language of love? This drive to protect the young at any cost is a thread woven through the fabric of the mammalian world. From the elephant matriarch shielding her calf from lions to the small songbird feigning a broken wing to lead a predator away from her nest, the behavior is ubiquitous. On the surface, it defies logic. The selfish gene, the imperative of individual survival, should trump all. Why would an organism willingly cancel its own future? The cold, elegant calculus of evolution provides an answer through a concept known as kin selection. An individual shares a percentage of its genes with its offspring. Their survival ensures the propagation of those shared genes into the next generation. From this perspective, sacrifice is not a paradox, but a strategy. The mother bear's death is not a negation of her genetic legacy, but its ultimate affirmation, paid in the currency of her own bloodline. The love that feels so boundless, so uniquely moral, is built upon a foundation of ruthless genetic arithmetic. It is a breathtaking paradox. The most tender act of care emerges from the most impersonal of processes. We can trace the echoes of this ancient pact back through the dust of millennia. Archaeology offers not stories, but silent, stone-hard testimony. In a grave tens of thousands of years old, the skeletons of a mother and child are found curled together, their bones telling a story the earth has refused to forget. The positioning suggests they died at the same time, perhaps in a landslide, a flood, or another sudden catastrophe. The mother's frame is often found arched over the smaller one, a final, futile shield against the crushing weight of the world. There is no fossilized emotion, no preserved cry of despair. Yet, in that silent architecture of bone, we read a familiar narrative. It is the same story as the bears. Was this too mere instinct? A hardwired response from a hominid mother? Or do we see in that eternal, embrace the first glimmer of something more, a consciousness of the act, a love that had begun to know its own name? This skeletal poetry suggests that our deepest moral intuitions are not recent inventions, but are carved into the very bedrock of our being, long before we had the words to sanctify them. In our modern world, we have taken this biological impulse and spun it into a golden moral standard. The image of the self-sacrificing mother sits at the very heart of our cultural mythology. It is the bedrock upon which we build our concepts of unconditional love, duty, and ultimate goodness. We see it in the mother working multiple jobs to ensure her child's education, in the parent donating an organ, in the countless daily surrenders of time, energy, and selfhood. Psychology frames the mother-child bond as the primary template for empathy, trust, and healthy emotional development. This sacrifice is the cradle of our humanity, the first and most powerful lesson in putting another's needs before our own. We have ritualized it, sanctified it, and held it up as the purest form of love, the invisible scaffold that holds up the entire edifice of human civilization. We have made a virtue of what began as a necessity. This seamless transition from biology to morality, however, forces a deeply unsettling question. If the mother's ultimate sacrifice is woven into our DNA, a successful evolutionary strategy for genetic propagation, can we truly call it moral? Is the grizzly bear acting morally when she charges to her death? We would hesitate to say so. Her action is sublime, awe-inspiring, but it feels instinctual, not ethical. She does not choose virtue. She obeys a programming older than thought. So where does that leave us? If our own acts of maternal sacrifice spring from the same deep well of biological imperative, are they not also, in essence, a sophisticated form of instinct? We have draped the hard wiring in the finery of emotion and called it love, but is its origin not the same? This thought reduces the symphony of human feeling to a simple, precomposed genetic score. It suggests that our highest virtue might be our oldest instinct, cleverly disguised in a story we tell ourselves about being good. Perhaps the answer lies not in the act itself, but in the scope of its application. The mother bear dies for her own. The human mother, we assume, would do the same. The impulse is narrow, targeted, ensuring the survival of a specific set of shared genes. This is a closed loop of sacrifice. To glimpse something that might truly be called morality, we must look for a different kind of act altogether. We must search for a moment where the calculus of kin selection breaks down, where the imperative for genetic selfishness is overruled. We must find an instance where an individual extends a hand not to their own child, not to their kin, but to a stranger, to someone from outside the tribe, who shares no bloodline and offers no obvious benefit to the survival of their genes. Does such a thing exist? Can a being programmed for tribal survival learn to care for the other, the outsider, the one who is not us? If that leap is possible, it must begin not in the warm, instinctual glow of the hearth, but in a colder, more complex fire. It must be forged in a place of conflict, where self-interest clashes with a dawning awareness of the other. It would require a new capacity, one for feeling a different kind of pain, not the physical pain of a wound, but the internal psychic pain of having caused one. It would require the capacity for shame. This uncomfortable feeling, this hot blush of self-recognition, might be the necessary crucible. For if we can feel pain for our actions against those outside our immediate circle, then we have taken the first step beyond our genetic programming. We have begun to build a moral universe that is not just about protecting our own, but about understanding our impact on others. But can such a fragile, painful feeling truly be the foundation for a higher ethics? Can a conscience, born from the ache of shame, ever be strong enough to override the ancient, powerful whisper of the blood? The chimp's eyes dart sideways, a quick, furtive glance. Its fingers, moments ago, deftly pilfering a piece of fruit, left unattended by a researcher, now freeze. It sees the human observer, the gaze meeting its own. And then, something remarkable happens. It doesn't flee. It doesn't challenge. Slowly, almost deliberately, it pulls its hand back, letting the fruit drop. It turns its body away, breaking the line of sight, and begins to groom itself with a studied nonchalance, as if nothing had ever happened. As if it could erase the transgression by simply refusing to acknowledge it under the weight of that watching eye. This is not merely fear of punishment. This is something more complex, more deeply woven into the fabric of social being. Is this the flicker of shame, a primal, pre-linguistic recognition that one has been seen, and in being seen, has been found wanting? This ancient impulse, this hot flush of self-awareness, might be one of the most profound and uncomfortable threads in the tapestry of consciousness. It is the internal cringe, the sudden desperate wish to disappear, the feeling that a spotlight has been switched on to illuminate a flaw we didn't even know was so glaring. We often claim this feeling as a uniquely human burden, the price we pay for our lofty morals and complex societies. But that chimp, caught in its silent, guilty pantomime, suggests the roots of shame dig far deeper into our evolutionary past, into a shared emotional soil that predates humanity itself. What does it mean if this feeling, which we so often cloak in the language of virtue and sin, is not ours alone? If the first creatures to feel shame were not philosophers or priests, but simply apes who had begun to care, desperately, what the others thought? The biology of this cringe is a silent symphony, conducted by the autonomic nervous system, that ancient, involuntary pilot of our inner world. The heart hammers a frantic rhythm against the ribs, a drumbeat of alarm. Blood vessels near the skin dilate, flooding the cheeks with heat and color, the unmistakable banner of embarrassment, a physiological response we have little conscious control over. This is the body's rebellion, a visceral announcement of a social misstep. Meanwhile, high in the command center, the prefrontal cortex is alight. This region, so crucial for complex social reasoning, for simulating the minds of others and predicting their reactions, goes into overdrive. It is the seat of the inner critic, the stage where we perform our actions for an imagined audience before we even make a move. It compares the act, the stolen fruit, the clumsy remark, the exposed secret, against an internalized map of social rules. When the two don't align, it triggers the alarm that sets the body humming. Is this feeling, then, merely a sophisticated alarm system, a biological check engine light for social survival? Archaeology, the science of silent stories, cannot unearth a feeling. Shame leaves no fossils. Its breath does not carbon date. We will never find the skeleton of a Neanderthal preserved in a posture of embarrassment. And yet, we might find its echoes in the artifacts they left behind, in the choices they made that hint at a changing relationship with the self and the communal gaze. Consider the Venus figurines, those ancient corpulent carvings of the female form that have been found scattered across Europe. Many are nude, celebrated in their fullness. But some, intriguingly, appear carved with subtle markings, a belt, a skirt, a net-like pattern across the loins. Were these merely decorative, or were they the earliest indication of a concept of covering? Not for warmth, but for something else. A desire to hint, to suggest, to draw a line between what is public and what is private. Could this be the first stone-carved whisper of a social skin? A recognition that the body itself could be a source of judgment, and by covering it, one could manage that judgment. Is the fig leaf in the Garden of Eden not a story of sin, but a metaphor for the birth of shame, the moment awareness dawned, and we sought to hide from the eyes of God and each other? In our modern world, this ancient biological social impulse has been refined into the invisible mortar that holds the bricks of society together. Shame is the quiet, relentless enforcer of a million unspoken rules. It is the reason we don't cut in line, even when no one is looking. It's the internal wince that stops a cruel joke on the tip of the tongue. It pushes us to dress appropriately, to meet deadlines, to return the lost wallet. It is the fear of the frown, the silent disapproval of the tribe, magnified and internalized until it becomes our own constant companion. From the playground to the boardroom, the threat of social exile, of becoming the one who is talked about, pointed at, excluded, is often a more powerful deterrent than any written law. The law punishes the act, shame annihilates the actor. It is the crowd's turned back, the cold shoulder, the canceled contract of belonging. But if this is the mechanism, can we truly call its product morality? Or is it just a highly polished, sophisticated form of social compliance, a performance of goodness for an audience we can never truly escape? This is the unsettling paradox at the heart of the matter. If shame is merely evolution's tool for group cohesion, a clever trick to make us police ourselves so we don't get kicked out of the survival club, then what becomes of true, authentic virtue? Where does the good deed done in absolute utter darkness fit in? The anonymous donation, the right thing chosen when the path of wrong is easier and guaranteed to never be discovered. If the internal critic is just the ghost of the tribe's voice whispering in our ear, then is any action ever truly selfless? Or is it always, on some level, a calculation to maintain our standing, even if the only audience is our own? Internalized sense of the communal gaze? Does a pure ethical impulse, utterly free from the stain of what others might think, even exist? Or are we forever bound to be performers on a social stage, our finest moments merely the best acts in the play? Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in the individual heart, with its tangled mix of genuine empathy and selfish calculation, but in the collective pulse of the group. The true power of shame is not in the single flushed cheek, but in the shared unspoken agreement of a community. It is the weight of 100 silent judgments, the collective intake of breath that says, "This is not who we are." It operates in the space before laws are written, in the ancient rhythmic justice of the tribe. It is the reason a thief might be driven from the cave not by a chief's decree, but by the unified, wordless rejection of every other member. They don't need to vote him out. They simply stop sharing the meat, stop meeting his eye, stop making a space for him by the fire. The punishment is not physical, but social, a death of belonging. This is the cradle of morality, not in a holy book, but in the cold, hard, practical need to trust one another to survive. The rules are written not on stone, but in the expectant, watching eyes of the people we rely on. And so, we are left to wonder if our conscience is simply the tribe's watchful eye, turned inward. What happens to the good we do when the tribe is no longer watching? The cold was a physical presence, a sharp-toothed creature that gnawed at the man's exposed skin. He pulled his furs tighter, but the wind found its way in, a cruel and probing finger. Behind him, the mouth of the cave glowed a soft, pulsating orange, a beacon of life and warmth, from which he was now permanently exiled. He had taken a haunch of meat, still cold from the storage pit. He was hungry, and the clan had plenty. The logic had seemed flawless in the moment. They hadn't beaten him. There had been no grand speech from the elder, no formal decree, only a series of cold, averted gazes. And then, this morning, the ultimate sentence. As he stirred from his sleep, he saw that the central fire, the heart of the clan, had been tended to by all, except for him. No one had added a log to his portion of the flame. His fire had been allowed to die. The message was silent, absolute, and colder than the winter air. He was no longer one of them. To stay was to freeze. So he walked, the warmth of the community receding with every step, replaced by the immense, silent judgment of the wilderness. This act of banishment, this silent, collective verdict, feels uniquely human in its cruel sophistication. Yet, we are not its sole inventors. The deep-seated impulse to police our own, to punish the transgressor for the good of the group, is a thread woven far back into the fabric of the social animal kingdom. A pod of dolphins will isolate a member who attacks a juvenile, swimming in tight formation to shut the aggressor out of their communal movements. A murder of crows will gather, cawing in a raucous, swirling mob around one of their own who has violated some unspoken corvid code. A feathered jury, delivering a verdict of relentless social harassment. High in the canopy, a troop of chimpanzees will turn with unified fury on a male who grows too violent, too disruptive, pinning him down and biting him not to kill, but to chastise, a brutal reminder of the boundaries he has overstepped. This is law before language, justice before judges. It is the ancient evolutionary engine of group cohesion, a way to maintain order without the need for a centralized power, where the community itself becomes the judge and the jailer. If the group is the organism, then the transgressor is a cancer, and rejection is the body's first, primal attempt to heal itself. But how do we find the fingerprints of such a fleeting social act in the dust of millennia? We cannot unearth a fossilized punishment. We must look for its shadow. At sites like Göbekli Tepe, where ancient T-shaped pillars stare out from a time before agriculture, before cities, we see the architecture of something new, a communal effort on a staggering scale. This was not a village. It was a cathedral. To coordinate such an endeavor required more than just family ties. It required rules. It implied roles, responsibilities, and, inevitably, consequences for those who shirked them. The stones whisper of a social contract, and sometimes the bones speak more directly. From bogs and ancient burial grounds, human remains occasionally emerge with telltale signs not of battle, but of sanctioned violence. A skull fractured by a familiar tool, not a stranger's weapon. A femur broken in a specific, patterned way that suggests a deliberate act of punishment, a public breaking of a body that had first broken a trust. These are the archaeological echoes of that silent banishment from the cave. The grim suggestion that the price of early community was sometimes paid in flesh and blood. This ancient machinery of social sanction did not vanish with the advent of modernity. It simply evolved, putting on a suit and tie. Today, we seldom banish people into the physical cold, but we have perfected the art of casting them into a social vacuum. A celebrity says the wrong thing. A corporation makes a grievous error. The response is not a court order, but a hashtag. A digital age shunning. Number sign cancel culture is just the modern, hyper-efficient manifestation of that ancient impulse. It is the tribe, now global and digital, withdrawing the fire of its approval, its platform, its patronage. No judge presides over these proceedings. No formal law is cited. The community, acting as a single distributed organism, renders its verdict and executes its sentence through collective withdrawal. It is a powerful, often devastating form of moral enforcement that proves our deepest social instincts remain unchanged. We still believe that to be cut off from the warmth of the group is the ultimate correction. But does this raw tribal power, whether around a fire or on a fiber optic network, truly seek justice, or does it merely seek the comfort of conformity? This is the unsettling question that hangs in the air, the smoke from the exile's dead fire. If this is the foundation of our morality, a sophisticated system of punishment designed solely to maintain group stability, then what, in the end, separates it from the law of the jungle? The strong alpha male chimpanzee punishes a rival to maintain his power and the troop's hierarchy. The human tribe banishes a thief to preserve its resources and social harmony. Both acts are brutally effective. Both ensure the survival of the collective. Is our vaunted sense of right and wrong, then, just a more complex set of instincts for self-preservation at the group level? a beautifully articulated version of might makes right, where the might is the unanimous will of the community. If morality is merely the rules of the club, written by the club to protect the club, then is it anything more than a shared selfishness? A way of saying what we can and cannot get away with if we wish to remain by the fire? And yet, something else flickers in that primordial darkness, a spark that suggests a different path entirely. For the same tribe that could cast a man out to die in the cold was also capable of an act that seems to defy all logic of survival. They shared. They looked at the hunted mammoth, a mountain of life-giving calories, and instead of the strongest hoarding it for themselves and their immediate kin, they distributed it to the old woman who could no longer hunt, to the child who was not their own, to the injured man who might never contribute again. This is an absurdity in the natural world. No other primate does this with such consistency and scale. So what strange new impulse was born in the human heart? An impulse that could judge and banish a thief with one hand and with the other offer a gift of precious food to a stranger. What could possibly compel a creature of survival to give its survival away? What madness of empathy, what beautiful and irrational flaw made us begin to share our food? The air is thick with the scent of blood and damp earth. A band of Paleolithic hunters returns to the firelight, their shadows dancing against the cave wall like ancient giants. They are weary, muscles aching, but triumphant. The largest among them, his strength evident in the set of his shoulders, drags the heavy carcass of a reindeer into the center of the group. The unspoken law of tooth and claw, the primal logic that governs the world outside this cave, would grant him the lion's share. He is the strongest. The prize is his. Yet, he does not hunch over it, teeth bared. Instead, he steps back, gesturing with a bloodied hand. The work of division begins. Strips of rich, red meat are portioned out, not just to the hunters who drove the spear, but to the elders whose eyes are dim, but whose minds hold maps of forgotten migrations, to the mothers nursing hungry infants, to the child who watched the fire. This is more than a meal. It is a ritual. It is a quiet defiance of the natural order. Why? Why would a creature of survival begin to give its hard-won sustenance away? To understand this moment is to plunge our hands into the very soil from which humanity grew. On the surface, the act seems to contradict every selfish impulse required for survival. Nature is a vast economy of scarcity, where a morsel of food kept for oneself can mean the difference between life and death through a lean season. We see flashes of sharing in the animal kingdom. A chimpanzee offering a scrap of meat in exchange for grooming, a vampire bat regurgitating blood for a roostmate who failed to feed. But these are transactions. They are ledgers of debt and credit, ensuring the giver will be a receiver tomorrow. They are pragmatic, a form of biological banking. The human act around that primordial fire feels different. It feels, for lack of a better word, like a choice. And science has begun to trace the contours of that choice deep within our own brains. When that early hunter handed a portion of his meat to the elder, a silent, internal transaction of a different kind was occurring. Modern neuroimaging reveals that the act of giving, of sharing resources, activates the brain's reward system with a startling potency. The ventral striatum and other regions dense with dopamine neurons light up as if we ourselves were receiving the gift. This is the chemistry of a good meal, of a social bond, of triumph. We are wired, it seems, to find profound pleasure in provisioning for others. This warm glow of altruism is not some lofty cultural invention. It is embedded in our very biology, a built-in reward for behavior that strengthens the group. Is this the simple answer, then? That we share because it feels good? That our noblest impulse is merely a sophisticated pursuit of a neurochemical prize? The stones and bones left behind by our ancestors whisper a more complex story. At sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have unearthed the remains of mammoths and other large game from over 25,000 years ago. The story is not written in words, but in cut marks. The patterns on these ancient bones are meticulous and uniform. The carcasses were not torn apart in a frenzied free-for-all. They were systematically butchered, as if following a shared, unwritten protocol. The distribution of these bones, scattered evenly across living areas, suggests a planned and equitable division of resources. This isn't evidence of a scramble where the strongest took all. It is evidence of a code. It points to a society that had already agreed on some fundamental level that the success of the individual was inextricably linked to the survival of the collective. The meal was a shared project long before it was a shared feast. This ancient code did not fade with the ice ages. It was codified, becoming the bedrock of every major human civilization and moral system. It is the foundation upon which we have built our sense of right and wrong. In the teachings of Buddhism, the concept of dana, or selfless giving, is a fundamental perfection. In Christianity, charity is a supreme virtue. In Islam, zakat, the obligatory giving of alms, purifies wealth and reinforces community. Secular societies enshrine this same impulse in the machinery of the state, through taxes, social security, and public health care. These are all vast, complex extensions of that first hunter choosing to share his meat. They are societal agreements that we are, in fact, our brother's keeper. We have transformed a biological impulse into a moral imperative, a philosophical ideal. We decided that a society's greatness is measured not by the wealth of its strongest, but by how it treats its weakest. But in elevating sharing to a virtue, have we merely polished a stone of self-interest until it shines like altruism? This is the unsettling question that lingers in the shadows of the firelight. If our brains reward us for giving, can any act be truly selfless? Is the profound satisfaction we feel when providing for another just an evolutionary trick, a pro-social instinct that ultimately serves to enhance our own survival and status within the group? Perhaps the hunter shared not out of pure virtue, but because a healthy, grateful group offered him better protection, more reliable allies, and a greater chance of passing on his genes. His generosity was an investment, and the dopamine rush was his dividend. This view reduces our most cherished acts of kindness to a sophisticated, subconscious selfishness. It suggests that even our morality is a prisoner to the cold calculus of evolution. Is genuine altruism even possible, or is it always, in some way, a transaction? And then we find the graves. The story of sharing does not end with the distribution of food, with the practicalities of survival. It takes a stranger, more profound turn. In a cave in northern Israel, at a site called Mount Carmel, lie remains that are roughly 100,000 years old. They are not simply bodies discarded or hidden away. They are burials. A woman was laid to rest in a shallow pit, her body curled as if in sleep. But closer examination revealed something that sends a shiver down the spine of time. In the soil around her skeleton, archaeologists found traces of pollen, clustered in such a way that suggests someone had placed flowering plants upon her body. What practical purpose could this possibly serve? This is not about feeding the living. This is not a transaction that can be repaid. It is a sharing of memory, of respect, of grief. It is a portioning out of emotion, a offering made to someone who can never return the favor. We began by sharing what was necessary for life, but then we started sharing what makes life meaningful. We began to feed not just the body, but the soul. If sharing food can be explained by biology and social contract, what ancient unspoken need compelled us to share our flowers with the dead? In a shallow grave within the limestone caves of Kafse, the light of a distant epoch falls upon a silent story. Here, cradled in the earth of what would one day be called Israel, lies the body of a 13-year-old. We do not know their name, the sound of their voice, or the dreams that filled their brief life. But we know this: they were not discarded. Cradled beside them, placed with a care that echoes across 100 millennia, are the antlers of a red deer, a stark and elegant offering to the darkness. This is not a refuse pile. This is a resting place. It is an argument against indifference, a whisper from the deep past suggesting that something profound had stirred within the human heart. Long before cathedrals or scriptures, Before the very concept of a god was formed, there was this simple, earth-shattering act, a community pausing to honor one of its own, not in life, but in death. From a purely biological standpoint, this behavior is an evolutionary puzzle, a costly and seemingly pointless expenditure of energy. In the ruthless arithmetic of survival, a corpse is merely organic matter, a potential attractor for predators, a vector for disease. The instinct should be to flee, to distance oneself from the scent of decay, to focus on the living, on feeding and breeding. Yet, something overrides this primal calculus. We now know that in the modern human brain, the searing pain of grief activates a complex network of regions associated not just with memory and attachment, but with moral reasoning. It is a storm of neurochemistry, where love crashes into loss, and from that collision emerges a powerful protective urge, a need to sanctify, to protect, even in absence. This care for the dead is a profound divergence from the rest of the natural world. It is, in a sense, biologically useless. And perhaps that is precisely what makes it so fundamentally human. It is our first declaration that some values, like respect, like love, might transcend the immediate demands of survival. If our evolutionary drive is to pass on our genes, what strange alchemy occurs when we pour our energy into honoring those who have left none behind? The grave at Kafza is not an isolated anomaly. It is a single early sentence in a long story written in bones and ochre. Far to the north, at a site called Sungir in Russia, 3 individuals were buried during the last ice age. A man, 2 children, their graves ablaze with a wealth that stuns the imagination. They were clothed in garments sewn with thousands of ivory beads, each one requiring hours of painstaking labor. They rested surrounded by spears carved from mammoth tusks, their bodies dusted with red ochre, that ancient pigment the color of blood and life. The message is inescapable. This was not a casual act. This was a ritual, a communal performance of loss and respect that required planning, coordination, and a shared belief system. Even earlier, in the Shanidar cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal was laid to rest perhaps 70,000 years ago. Pollen analysis suggests the body was deliberately placed upon a bed of flowers: yarrow, groundsel, ragwort, hyacinth. Was it a final offering of beauty, a practical attempt to mask the scent of decay, or something else entirely? A symbolic gesture blooming in a mind we once thought too simple for such abstractions. The red ochre found in so many of these graves is not mere decoration. It is a metaphor made physical, a desperate attempt to paint the pallor of death with the vibrant hue of life, to insist that this stillness is not an end, but a transition. This ancient impulse to ritualize death has not faded. It has been refined, codified, and woven into the very fabric of human society. A modern funeral is, on one level, a complex social script. It has schedules, eulogies, specific clothing, and prescribed roles. It serves to reunite a community, to offer comfort, to mark the legal and social passing of an individual. But to see it only as social mechanics is to miss its deeper moral heartbeat. The black attire, the solemn music, the carefully chosen words, these are all the direct descendants of the red ochre and the deer antlers. They are a collective, performative assertion that a life mattered, that its absence creates a void that must be acknowledged. It is a societal promise to remember, to carry the legacy of the departed forward. In standing together to say goodbye, we are not just mourning a single life. We are reaffirming a universal contract of respect for life itself. We are stating, in the most powerful way we know, that no one is merely disposable. The funeral is a technology of meaning, and its core function is the cultivation of reverence. Yet, a shadow of a question lingers at the edge of the grave, as ancient as the practice itself. Could this entire magnificent edifice of respect be built upon a foundation of something less noble than conscious morality? What if our need to bury our dead springs not from a reasoned ethical principle, but from a raw, uncontrollable emotional reflex, a simple inability to let go? Is the careful placement of flowers or antlers the starting point of a conscious right and wrong? Or is it merely the cultural fossilization of a deep-seated biological aversion, a sophisticated form of grief hygiene? Did we first bury bodies out of respect, or out of a visceral revulsion to the sight and smell of decay? Did we sanctify the dead to honor them, or to hide the unsettling reality of our own inevitable fate from ourselves? Perhaps the rituals we created to manage our fear and sorrow slowly, over millennia, accreted meaning like layers of pearl around a grain of sand. The habit, repeated often enough, became custom. The custom, examined over generations, became sacred. Does that make the resulting respect any less real? Or does it simply mean that our highest virtues might have the most humble and most human of origins? Maybe morality did not begin with a thunderous revelation or a carved commandment. Perhaps it was whispered into existence, one story at a time, beside the warmth of a fire. It started with a simple, inexplicable urge to treat the empty vessel with care, and in doing so, a story was born. A story about who we are, what we value, and what we believe happens when the breath leaves the body. That single act at Kafsi was a seed. It was a narrative waiting to be told and retold, its meaning growing richer with each telling. The antlers were not just antlers, they became a symbol. The red ochre was not just pigment, it became a prayer. The grave was not just a hole, it became a testament. And in that space between the biological impulse and the cultural story, the first fragile layer of ethics was laid down. It was a meaning made collectively, a truth agreed upon not by decree, but by a shared, silent understanding around a freshly turned mound of earth. If our sense of right and wrong was born not in the cold light of reason, but in the warm, narrative glow of the campfire, where we gathered to make sense of our pain and our world, then what does that say about the stories we choose to tell today? The night air grows cold, the kind of cold that seeps into bones and hushes the world. But here, in the clearing, a circle of faces is warm, illuminated by the dance of orange flames. The fire crackles, a primal percussion against the silence of the gathering dark. An elder, his face a map of years etched by wind and sun, leans forward. The firelight catches the deep pools of his eyes as he begins to speak. His voice is low, a gravelly rumble that seems to rise from the earth itself. He tells of ancestral spirits who watch from the stars, of great hunts and terrible storms, and of a man once trusted who betrayed his kin for a handful of gleaming stones. The punishment was swift, terrible, and just, delivered not by a chief, but by the very forest, as if nature itself had enacted a moral law. The children listen, their eyes wide, not with fear, but with a deep, absorbing understanding. They are not just hearing a story. They are being woven into a fabric, a shared understanding of who they are and what is expected of them. In the flickering light around this ancient hearth, morality is not taught, it is felt. This gathering is far more than simple entertainment, a way to pass the long, dark hours. It is a biological and neurological event of profound significance. The control of fire was a revolution that stretched the day, pushing back the tyranny of the sun and gifting our ancestors with precious, stolen time. This was calories saved from shivering, protection from predators that lurked in the shadows. But perhaps its greatest gift was sociological. The fire pit became the first theater, the first classroom, the first town square. In its warm glow, social bonds were annealed. Neurologically, this ritual is a potent cocktail. The act of listening to a narrative, especially a shared, emotionally charged one, triggers a release of dopamine, the very same neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. It is a biological incentive for a highly social behavior, a chemical reward for paying attention to the rules, norms, and cautionary tales of the tribe. The brain, bathed in this warm light and these communal chemicals, becomes uniquely receptive, impressionable. The story bypasses the analytical mind and speaks directly to the limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory. Is our sense of justice, then, not just a concept, but a sensation? a feeling as real as the warmth from these flames. We can trace the embers of this practice back through the millennia, deep into the earth itself. Caves like Chauvet in France or El Castillo in Spain are not merely galleries of breathtaking art. They are archaeological time capsules, preserving the very moments these fireside gatherings occurred. Soot-blackened ceilings and ancient hearths, found alongside stunning depictions of aurochs, lions, and abstract handprints, tell a silent story of their own. Here, in these deep, sacred chambers, our ancestors did not just draw what they saw. They drew what they believed, what they feared, what they revered. The images were not mere records. They were narratives. A painting of a hunter being gored by a bison is not just a scene. It is a parable. It is a story about respect, about hubris, about the consequences of failing to follow the unwritten rules of the hunt. This was likely humanity's first curriculum, a visual education in ethics and cosmology, taught not through dry lecture, but through awe-inspiring imagery in a ceremonial space. Was the cave itself the first cathedral, and the flickering firelight upon its walls the first morality play? This tradition of narrative moral instruction did not fade with the Stone Age. It evolved, becoming the very bedrock of human culture. From the intricate, tragic webs of Greek mythology warning of pride and defiance of the gods, to the stark, visceral lessons of Grimm's fairy tales where greed and cruelty are met with brutal, poetic justice, our foundational stories are ethical training grounds. They operate on a principle far more powerful than abstract philosophy, the power of metaphor. A child does not need a treatise on the categorical imperative to understand why the boy who cried wolf was wrong. They feel it. They do not need a lecture on empathy to side with Cinderella against her stepsisters. They experience the visceral satisfaction of her eventual vindication. The complex, often contradictory tenets of a moral life, be brave, be kind, be loyal, don't lie, don't steal, help the weak, are compressed into a memorable, emotionally resonant package. A story provides a sandbox for the conscience, a safe space to explore the consequences of actions without having to live through the pain. It is a simulation of social life. Could it be that our deepest moral intuitions are not discovered through reason, but imprinted upon us through the stories we are told? Yet, this undeniable power of the story presents a quiet, unsettling paradox. If morality is so effectively transmitted through cultural narrative, through the careful curation of myths and fairy tales told for generations, then what does that say about its origins? It begins to look less like something innate, something hardwired into our very being by evolution, and more like a technology. A supremely sophisticated and ancient technology, but a technology nonetheless, a set of instructions passed down, refined, and installed into each new generation around the symbolic fire. It suggests that our ethical sense is a taught construct, a carefully crafted software running on the hardware of our brains. The elder's story of the betrayer punished is not revealing a universal truth, but programming a specific, culturally approved code. This view reduces morality to a magnificent, life-saving meme, a story so successful it convinced us it was a law of nature. But if that is true, if it is all just learned behavior, then are we not merely echoing the voices of our ancestors without any inherent moral compass of our own? Is our conscience just a ghost of campfire stories past? This leads us to a quieter fire, a more intimate laboratory of the soul, the mind of a very young child. Long before they can sit through a fairy tale, before they can understand the complex allegory of a cave painting or a myth, children reveal something startling. At just 18 months old, a toddler will often show a preference for a puppet that helps another, and will frown upon or reject a puppet that is mean. They exhibit a rudimentary sense of fairness, of distress at the sight of another's pain, a desire to comfort. This is long before any parent has sat them down for a formal lesson on ethics. They seem to arrive in the world preloaded with certain expectations about cooperation and harm. So we are left circling the flames, watching the shadows dance, holding two seemingly contradictory truths. We are the storytelling animal, our moral landscapes undeniably shaped and colored by the narratives we share. And yet, we may also be born with the first draft of a moral code already written in our neural architecture, a foundational operating system waiting for the stories to provide the applications, the language, the specific cultural context. The firelight doesn't create the shape of the face it illuminates. It merely reveals it, casting its features into sharp relief against the darkness. Perhaps the stories we tell do not create morality from nothing, but instead speak to a deep, pre-existing potential within us, giving it form, giving it voice, giving it a place to gather and grow. The question that lingers in the smoke, then, is not whether the story taught the lesson, but what ancient part of us was already there, waiting to understand. An 18-month-old child watches an adult drop an object. Without a word, without a promise of reward, the toddler takes a few unsteady steps, reaches down with a clumsy grip, and returns the item. It is a simple act, almost insignificant. Yet, it contains a universe of questions. No one taught this. There was no lesson. The child simply saw a need and felt, on some deep and unarticulated level, that they should respond. This tiny moment of spontaneous helping, repeated in countless homes across the world, feels like a whisper from our very core. It suggests that the compass of right and wrong, the very foundation of what we call morality, might not be a complex technology we install through culture, but a native language written into our bones. But is this truly our original programming? Or are we merely seeing the first, faint echoes of a teaching so subtle we've forgotten it was ever given? The science of the infant mind offers a compelling glimpse into our moral hardware. At research institutes like the Max Planck Institute, studies with very young children have peeled back the layers of socialization to reveal something astonishing. Before they can speak in full sentences, before they can be effectively bribed with cookies or threatened with timeouts, children demonstrate a propensity for helping, for sharing, and even for a primitive sense of fairness. They will point out a dropped item to a struggling adult. They will offer a toy to a child who has none. Neuroimaging studies suggest that these acts of altruism are not cold, calculated decisions. They light up the brain's reward centers, the same regions that respond to a sweet taste or a pleasant melody. This is the chemistry of intrinsic reward. The child isn't helping for a treat. The act of helping is the treat. It feels good, in a very real, neurological sense, to be good. This implies a biological substrate for cooperation, a wiring within us that finds satisfaction in social harmony and connection. Is our first moral impulse, then, not a learned rule, but a felt pleasure, a primal nudge towards the other? If this inclination is so fundamental, we might expect to find its fossilized traces deep in our shared past. The archaeological record, however, presents a silent and fragmentary puzzle. Stone tools and butchered bones tell us of survival, of competition, of the club. But what of the cradle? Direct evidence of compassion is ephemeral. It leaves no stone tools, no cut marks on bone. We are left to interpret the shadows it cast. We find them in the careful burial of a loved one, their body arranged in a restful pose, accompanied by flowers or a single meaningful artifact, a gesture that speaks of grief and care that transcends mere utility. We see it in the ancient figurines, like the Venus of Willendorf or the countless mother and child sculptures found across continents. These are not depictions of power or conquest, but of nurture, of relationship, of a profound and protective bond. This ancient art suggests that alongside our narrative of conflict, we have always held a space for the quiet, powerful story of connection. Does our art, then, tell a deeper truth about our priorities than our weapons do? This notion of an inborn moral sense reverberates powerfully in the modern world, particularly in the cold, precise language of law. The very concept of criminal responsibility hinges on a fascinating assumption, that an individual possesses an inherent capacity to know the fundamental difference between right and wrong. The monoton rules, a foundational principle in many legal systems, defend on the grounds of insanity, only if the defendant was laboring under a defect of reason that prevented them from knowing the nature and quality of their act, or that it was wrong. This implies that knowing it is wrong to harm another is a default state, a baseline of human understanding. Education and law do not create this knowledge from nothing. They articulate, refine, and enforce a knowing that is already there. The law in its own way seems to agree with the toddler and the neuroscientist. We are born with a moral starting point. So does the courtroom, in seeking to punish transgression, actually pay silent homage to our innate goodness? Yet, a glaring paradox immediately presents itself. If the knowledge of good is so innate, if it is woven into our neural fabric and confirmed by our laws, then why does our world, and our history, overflow with cruelty, injustice, and violence? Why do we require the immense, sprawling architectures of religion, ethical philosophy, and legal systems? Why the endless sermons, the parental lectures, the thick books of moral reasoning, if the basic blueprint is already within us? This is the counterpoint that rings through the ages. The innate impulse may be a seed, but it is a fragile one. It can be choked by the weeds of fear, scarcity, and tribalism. It can be twisted by trauma or starved by neglect. Perhaps culture and education are not the writers of the moral code, but its gardeners. They till the soil, protect the young shoot, and help it grow into a stronger, more resilient form. They provide the stories, the rituals, and the shared understandings that translate a raw, biological impulse into a sophisticated social contract. The instinct might be to help, but society must define what help looks like and for whom. Is our nature then merely a potential, waiting for nurture to give it its final and infinitely variable shape? So, we are left not with an answer, but with a tension. It is not a choice between nature or nurture, biology or culture. The truth seems to lie in the dance between them. We may arrive in this world with a preloaded map, an innate sense of direction towards cooperation and empathy. But the territory of human life is complex, filled with shadows and difficult crossings. Culture provides the legends for that map, the shared stories that name the mountains and rivers, that warn of chasms and point towards safe harbors. It takes the raw, feeling impulse of the toddler and gives it context, reason, and language. Our morality is both the seed and the tree. It is the biological reward for a kind act and the centuries of philosophical debate about what kindness truly means. It is the untaught urge to help and the taught understanding of who constitutes our we. Perhaps, then, the deepest question is not whether morality is innate or learned, but how we can create a world that better listens to and nurtures that first, quiet, generous impulse. And if that impulse is so deeply biological, could its very origin be found not in lofty ideals, but in the most fundamental animal need to survive? What if the first moral act was not a choice, but a reflex, something as simple and essential as a touch? The air is cold and heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. A fire crackles weakly, its light dancing across the rough walls of a shallow cave. In the flickering shadows, one figure sits hunched over another. The one on the ground breathes in shallow, ragged gasps, the rhythm of a body slowly surrendering. There are no words. Language in its infancy is a clumsy tool, utterly inadequate for the vast, silent chasm opening between life and whatever lies beyond. The living one looks into the glazing eyes of the dying, and a strange impulse stirs within. It is not hunger, not fear, not the instinct to flee. It is something else entirely. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reaches out. His hand, calloused and strong from survival, rests on the other's shoulder. Then, he does something for which there is no practical reason, no immediate evolutionary payoff. He leans in, and he holds. A meaningless gesture, a waste of energy, a vulnerable press of skin against skin in a world defined by claw and tooth. And yet, it is undeniably, profoundly warm. This is the first embrace, not as a greeting, but as a solace, a silent testament to a new kind of awareness blooming in the dark. the understanding that some wounds are not of the body, but of the solitary soul, and that the only possible medicine is shared presence. This primal act, this first communion of comfort, is written into our very biology. When skin meets skin in a conscious embrace, a quiet alchemy begins within. The hypothalamus, an ancient region of the brain, signals the release of a powerful neurochemical, oxytocin. Often dubbed the bonding hormone or the cuddle chemical, oxytocin floods the system, performing a delicate ballet on our internal state. It gently lowers cortisol, the hormone that screams of stress and threat, slowing the frantic drumbeat of the heart and quieting the panic of the mind. But its true magic lies in its ability to weave connection. It promotes feelings of trust, of calm, of devotion. This is not a cold, mechanical process. It is the physiological foundation of empathy, the bedrock of love. In that silent cave, the first comforter was, without knowing it, engaging in a form of bioalchemy. He was using his body as a pharmacy, dispensing a potent dose of peace to a fellow human embarking on the most terrifying journey alone. The embrace became the first and most powerful non-verbal language, a signal that screamed, "You are not alone," in a vocabulary written in nerves and chemistry, long before it could be articulated in words. Could it be that our highest ideals of compassion are, at their core, simply a beautiful and complex extension of this basic biological imperative to connect? We are left to wonder if this was an isolated incident, a fleeting moment of tenderness lost to time. But the earth itself, in its patient keeping of bones, offers us clues. In a quiet grave in Valdaro, Italy, the skeletons of a young man and woman were discovered, locked in an eternal embrace, their bodies curled towards one another for over 6,000 years. Their story is mute, but their posture is a scream across millennia. At the Dmanisi site in Georgia, where some of the earliest hominid remains outside Africa were found, evidence suggests not just solitary lives, but groups that cared for their aged and infirm. A jawbone from an elderly individual who had lost all her teeth long before death suggests she was kept alive, her food chewed for her life valued beyond its utility. These are not the actions of mere survivalists. They are the actions of beings capable of profound bonding. The physical act of holding, of caring, of facing the world together left its imprint in the soil. These ancient embraces suggest that the capacity for empathy, for seeing the self in the other and feeling their pain as our own, is not a modern luxury, but a deep, ancient current in the human story. What does it say about us that our earliest ancestors, fighting for every breath, still chose to spend precious energy on the soft, vulnerable language of touch? This legacy of the embrace continues to unfold in our modern world, refined through the lenses of science and culture. In the controlled environment of psychological therapy, the power of safe, consensual touch is recognized as a fundamental tool for healing. It can ground a fractured mind, build trust where words fail, and reassure a traumatized nervous system that safety is possible. It is a direct channel to the primal comfort first discovered in that dark cave. Culturally, the hug has transcended its biological roots to become a universal symbol rich with meaning. It is the flag of reconciliation waved after a bitter argument, the silent oath of forgiveness, the shared warmth in the cold shock of grief, the wordless celebration of a joy too big to contain. It is a ritual that acknowledges our inherent vulnerability and our profound need to bridge the solitary confinement of our own bodies. We have built cathedrals and written symphonies, yet we still return to this simplest of gestures to express our most complex emotions. Has this ancient tool become our most sophisticated language for the heart? Yet, for all its purity in that first instance, the embrace, like any human expression, is not immune to corruption. The same impulse to connect, to comfort, and to bond can be co-opted, its language twisted. The biology of touch is powerful, but it is not morality. A hug can be genuine, but it can also be a performance. An abuser might offer a tight embrace after an act of cruelty. a manipulative tool to short-circuit anger and evoke a conditioned response of forgiveness, exploiting the very oxytocin-driven bond meant for good. A political figure might hug a victim for a photo opportunity, weaving a narrative of compassion that masks indifference. The embrace, in these instances, becomes a club disguised as a cradle. It reveals uncomfortable truth, the capacity for empathy, the ability to understand what another feels, does not guarantee moral action. It can simply make one better at manipulation, at understanding which lever to pull to elicit a desired response. If we can simulate the outward sign of connection so perfectly, does that not call into question the very nature of the connection itself? Can the deepest human bond be so easily falsified? This ambiguity forces us to look deeper, beyond the warm, deceptive glow of feeling. If morality were merely the impulse to comfort, the realm of ethics would be simple, but it is not. It is also about justice, about fairness, about right action, even when it is difficult and offers no immediate emotional reward. The first hug was an act of pure emotional empathy. But is that the entirety of our moral compass? To find an answer, perhaps we must look beyond our own species, to creatures who do not hug, who lack the complex emotional vocabulary of touch, yet who live by intricate codes of conduct. What of the wolf, whose social world is built on strict hierarchy and brutal enforcement, yet also on fierce loyalty and cooperation? What of the elephant, who mourns its dead? They operate within a framework of fairness and consequence, a form of justice without the language of embrace. Their existence poses a challenging, quieter question, one that pulls us from the intimate circle of two figures in a cave and out into the wider world of the tribe, the pack, and the society. If our morality begins with a feeling, a biological urge to connect, where does it go from there? Is the embrace the end of the story of human connection, or merely its beautiful, flawed beginning? The lone wolf crosses the scent-marked boundary, a silent line of chemical warning etched into the soil and air. Its paws, unfamiliar with this particular stretch of earth, carry it into a territory that is not its own. The response is not a debate. It is not a negotiation. It is a sudden, violent explosion of movement and sound. The pack converges, a coordinated fury of muscle and tooth, driving the intruder back across the invisible line from which it came. There is no trial, no appeal, no consideration of motive. Perhaps it was lost, desperate, or simply young and foolish. The reason does not matter. The law in this world is written in fang and claw. Its enforcement is immediate, absolute, and utterly impersonal. This is the justice of the pack, a brutal, elegant, and ancient system of order. We watch this primal drama unfold, and a shiver of recognition runs down our spine. It feels familiar, this swift and terrible retribution. We see in it a distorted mirror of our own world, a raw, unvarnished version of the systems we have built to govern ourselves. The wolf's justice is a stark, biological imperative. For many social animals, from the deep-diving pods of dolphins to the complex hierarchies of chimpanzee troops, the stability of the group is paramount. An individual who steals food, shirks its duty, or threatens the social fabric faces immediate consequences: a sharp rebuke, a physical confrontation, ostracization. These are the foundational layers of social contract, etched not on parchment, but in the very circuitry of the brain. They are the unspoken rules that prevent the tribe from collapsing into chaos. The punishment is a tool for maintenance, a way to sand down the rough edges of individuality that might snag on the smooth functioning of the whole. It is a justice without malice, but also without mercy. Long before the first written code of law was chiseled into stone, our ancestors were weaving their own versions of this social fabric. Consider the ancient settlement of Lepenski Vir, nestled in the iron gates of the Danube. Here, over 8,000 years ago, people built a community with a startling sense of order. The houses were arranged in a precise, fan-like pattern, each with a distinct hearth and a floor of limestone, some even sculpted into a fish-like form. The dead were buried in specific relation to the homes, often with grave goods, tools, ornaments, artifacts, carefully chosen and placed. This is not the random scatter of a nomadic band. This is a landscape organized by a shared mind. The distribution of space and objects whispers of roles, of status, of rituals, of a collective agreement on how things must be done. It speaks of a nascent concept of belonging and, by its inverse, of transgression. To bury someone with a prized tool was to acknowledge their role. To exclude them from the sacred arrangement of the village was a sentence in itself. This is the archaeology of pre-law, the silent testimony of a community drawing its own lines in the sand, long before the concepts of justice or legality had found their names. And then, we took a leap. Human justice, while rooted in the same soil of social necessity, began to grow in a different direction. We built upon the animal instinct for order, but added chambers of breathtaking complexity. We developed codified laws, moving the rules from the realm of instinct and tradition into the realm of language and symbol. We instituted judges and juries, introducing the fragile revolutionary idea of a third-party perspective. We conceived of intent, of mitigating circumstances, of the difference between a mistake and a malice. Most astonishingly, we invented the concept of mercy. A wolf pack does not forgive, it enforces. A human court can look at a transgressor, understand the poverty that drove them to theft, the fear that provoked violence, the brokenness that led to a crime, and choose something other than pure retribution. We call it leniency, rehabilitation, compassion. It is the conscious, often difficult decision to sometimes value the redemption of the individual over the simple, clean efficiency of the pack's punishment. Our justice seeks not only to protect the tribe, but to understand it, and in understanding, to sometimes heal it. But this grand edifice we have constructed, with its courtrooms and its libraries of legal philosophy, begs an uncomfortable question. Are we truly so different? Is our elaborate dance of justice, the wigs and robes, the solemn oaths, the lengthy deliberations, anything more than a highly sophisticated, ritualized version of the pack's instinct? Have we simply learned to talk our way around the same brutal, ancient impulses? We dress our territorialism in the language of national sovereignty. We sanitize our violence, delegating it to a specialized class of enforcers who act on our behalf, allowing the rest of the pack to keep its paws clean. We justify our exclusion and punishment of the other with complex legal and moral arguments, but the underlying engine may still be the same deep-seated need to protect the in-group, to maintain the boundaries, to expel the threat. Is human justice just animal instinct wearing a suit and tie, using a vocabulary so vast it has fooled even itself? Perhaps the search for an answer lies not in how we treat the obvious intruder, the one who directly threatens us, but in a far more curious and uniquely human behavior. The true departure from the animal kingdom may be found in the moments we pass judgment on those who have done us no personal harm at all. We watch a stranger on a screen, a figure in a news story from a continent away, and we feel a surge of outrage. We read about a historical figure and condemn their actions from the comfort of our distant present. We form strong opinions about the conduct of people whose lives are entirely separate from our own. The wolf cares only for the wolf in its valley. It does not expend energy judging the hunting tactics of a pack in another forest. We, however, constantly extend our moral gaze beyond our immediate kin, beyond our tribe, even beyond our species. We have become the self-appointed judges of a world we never made. Is this the flowering of a higher ethics, a morality untethered from brute instinct? Or is it the ultimate abstraction of the pack mentality, a territorialism so vast it now encompasses the entire globe and all of history within its claim? What does it mean that we hold a gavel not just for our own pack, but for the whole world? In a simple game, a quiet agreement holds the players together. They pass tokens, share smiles, assume a shared understanding of the rules. Then player A, with a flick of the wrist too quick to follow, secretly takes more than their share. A small betrayal. Player B, directly wronged, reacts with predictable anger. But then there is player C, who was not involved, who lost nothing, who watches from the sidelines. a strange thing happens. A flush of heat rises on their skin, a knot tightens in their stomach. They feel a genuine burning indignation. Why? Why does a stranger's transgression, a cheat that costs them nothing, feel like a personal violation? This spark of anger in the uninvolved observer is a uniquely human mystery. It is a quiet testament to an invisible architecture we have built around ourselves, a web of expectations and rules that we agree to live by, even with strangers. We call it morality, justice, a social contract. But to see it ignite in a third party is to see the blueprint of human society itself. It suggests that our sense of right and wrong is not merely a personal calculation of gain and loss, nor is it only the fierce loyalty of kin. It is something broader, a force that compels us to care for the integrity of the game itself, even when we are not active players. This is the emergence of the outsider, the third-party punisher, a figure so rare in the natural world that its existence asks a profound question. What kind of creature are we that we feel compelled to enforce rules for a community we may not even know? To understand this impulse, we must look back, far beyond the rules of any game, to the very foundations of our shared life. In the animal kingdom, acts of retribution are almost always personal. A monkey will attack the rival who stole its food. A chimp will retaliate against the one who challenged its status. The calculus is immediate and selfish. Punishment by an unrelated third party, an individual with nothing direct to gain, is an extraordinary anomaly. Yet in humans, it is commonplace. This suggests an evolutionary leap. Perhaps this willingness to bear a cost, the time, the energy, the potential risk of conflict, to uphold a norm, was the glue that allowed us to form groups larger than just family units. It was the price of admission to a tribe, the proof that one could be trusted to value the group's harmony over immediate, selfish interest. The outsider's anger, therefore, might be the echo of an ancient pact, a biological whisper reminding us that our survival has always depended on more than just individual strength. It has depended on a collective trust, fiercely guarded. The evidence of this deep-seated need for collective order is etched not in our genes alone, but in stone and ritual. In the scattered remains of early Neolithic villages, archaeologists find hints of a world being structured by shared belief. They uncover mass graves not of warriors, but of individuals who may have been ostracized or executed. They find symbols, repeated across vast distances, suggesting a common understanding of power and taboo. In these quiet artifacts, we can almost hear the murmur of the first town halls, the gathering of the community to judge one of its own. This required the concept of the outsider in a new, powerful sense. The individual temporarily stepping outside of their personal relationships to embody the will of the tribe. The punishment was no longer a personal vendetta, but a public spectacle, a ritual reaffirmation of the rules that held the fragile community together. The anger of Player C was, in a sense, formalized here. It was channeled into ceremony, becoming the voice of the gods or the ancestors, a force of nature ensuring that the harvest would come and the tribe would endure. The outsider became the priest, the judge, the embodiment of a law greater than any single person. This ancient impulse did not fade. It simply found new arenas, new tools. Today, our global village is woven together by digital threads, and the role of the third-party punisher has exploded in scale and speed. Social media platforms have become the modern-day village square, and the phenomenon of cancel culture, or public shaming, is its most potent and controversial form of justice. Here, the outsiders are countless, faceless. They are individuals wholly disconnected from the original transgression, yet they feel a powerful call to act. They become the jury and the executioner, leveraging the collective voice to hold power to account, to enforce new, evolving social norms. A celebrity's decades-old remark, a corporation's unethical practice, a politician's lie, these are met with the coordinated outrage of millions of third parties. In this digital ecosystem, the community itself becomes the living, breathing moral compass, its needle swinging violently with each new revelation. It is a powerful demonstration that the need to police the boundaries of acceptable behavior is as strong as ever, a force that can topple empires and reshape conversations in a matter of hours. The individual's spark of indignation is now a wildfire, capable of both cleansing and devastating everything in its path. Yet, here lies the peril. For the very strength of the outsider, their emotional, disinterested passion is also their greatest weakness. Can the crowd truly be wise? The outsider, removed from the nuance and context of a situation, is dangerously susceptible to the contagion of emotion, the distortion of prejudice, and the simplified narrative of the mob. The same righteous anger that seeks justice can be easily weaponized by misinformation, fueled by hidden agendas, or twisted by sheer groupthink. The digital court often tries its cases on a feed of headlines and out-of-context clips, its verdict delivered in a storm of likes and shares long before all the facts are known. The outsider, who once served as the guardian of the tribe's integrity, can become its most potent agent of error and injustice. So we are left with an uneasy tension. Is this collective morality, this voice of the outsiders, a true north on our compass or a dangerous mirage? Is it the wisdom of the crowd or the tyranny of the majority wearing a mask of virtue? This tension leads us to the outermost edge of the question, to the most chilling paradox of the outsider's role. For if an uninvolved party can feel righteous anger over a murder, then by the same token, they can also become the agent of killing in the name of that very righteousness. History's darkest chapters are not written by monsters who believe themselves to be evil, but by ordinary people who believed with utter conviction that they were on the side of good. The inquisitor burning the heretic, the revolutionary guillotining the aristocrat, the extremist planting a bomb, all are third parties enacting a punishment they deem morally necessary for a transgression against their idea of order. They are the ultimate outsiders, enforcing their code upon others with absolute certainty. This forces upon us a deeply unsettling question, one that unravels the simple thread of anger we began with. If killing is the ultimate wrong, then what does it mean when we kill in the name of stopping wrong? Is the violence of the righteous outsider still a form of justice, or does it simply complete a cycle, becoming the very thing it sought to destroy? And so we find ourselves standing at the precipice of this contradiction, the line between judge and executioner blurring before our eyes. We started with a simple cheat in a game and arrived at the gallows. The outsider's anger, that spark of human morality, contains the seed of both our civilization and its potential for barbarism. It builds the community, and it can tear it apart. It is the force that says, "This is not right," and the same force that says, "And therefore, I must make it right, no matter the cost." This leaves us with a silence more profound than any answer, a question that echoes from the ancient past into our uncertain future. When we pick up the stone to punish the wrongdoer, how can we ever be certain we are not simply adding another stone to the pile? The act is done. A member of the tribe lies still, his life extinguished by the hand of another. The air, once filled with the sounds of communal life, is now heavy with a silence that is more than the absence of noise. It is the presence of a new, terrible knowledge. The remaining individuals gather, not with a preordained plan, but drawn together by a shared, gut-deep understanding that something fundamental has been shattered. There are no written codes to consult, no elder judges to defer to. There is only the raw, unsettling feeling in the pit of each stomach, a collective intuition that screams this wrongness cannot stand. And so, they make a choice. They kill the killer. This is not an act of rage in the heat of the moment. It is a deliberate, chilling response. It feels like justice, but in this primordial courtroom, under the vast and indifferent sky, a profound contradiction is born. If to kill is the ultimate transgression, what does it mean to build a moral order upon that very same act? Is this the first ethical paradox, the original sin of a society trying to define itself? We can trace the deep roots of this paradox not in law books, but in the ancient, gnarled branches of our family tree. Among our primate cousins, we see the faint, flickering shadows of this behavior. A chimpanzee who steals food or attacks an infant may face the retribution of the alpha male, a swift and violent correction that maintains the hierarchy. But this is punishment as a tool of power, a club to enforce order from the top down. The human act around that first body was something different, something far more revolutionary. It was not the decree of a single dominant individual, but the emergence of a collective will. It was a judgment, a primitive form of trial. This was the moment the club, a mere instrument of force, began its slow, imperfect evolution into the scales of justice. The instinct to punish a wrongdoer may be old, but the act of judging them together feels uniquely human. What strange alchemy in our brains transformed the raw material of revenge into the first crude alloy of communal justice? The stones themselves whisper this ancient story. At a place called Jebel Sahaba, a cemetery from a time when the world was much younger, archaeologists uncovered a grim testimony. The bones buried there, over 13,000 years old, tell a tale not of a single battle, but of something more intimate and perhaps more sinister. Many of the skeletons show signs of violence, but not the clean, sharp wounds of combat. Instead, there are small, precise impact points on the back of skulls, the telltale fractures of projectiles hitting from behind, and the nicks and gouges on bones that suggest a finishing blow. This is not the chaos of war, it is the chilling efficiency of execution. It paints a picture of a society that had already developed a concept of transgression and a sanctioned response. This was likely retribution, a life for a life, a summary, calculated act of violence intended to purify the community of a perceived pollution. The stones of Jebel Sahaba are not just graves. They are the first courtroom walls, the first prison bars, built from the flint and the fear of a species grappling with its own darkness. Did these early humans feel the same cold certainty, the same grim satisfaction of duty done, that we feel today when justice is served? Or was there a tremor of doubt, the first flicker of the paradox that haunts us still? This impulse did not fade with the Stone Age. We merely built cathedrals around it. We codified it, ritualized it, and dressed it in the solemn robes of law. The modern world is the inheritor of that primal verdict. We have the death penalty, where the state, as the representative of the collective, meticulously plans the ending of a life. We wage wars we brand as just, where the killing of thousands is framed not as murder, but as a moral necessity, a painful duty required to protect a way of life or topple a tyrant. In every case, the core argument remains unchanged. We kill to protect morality. We break our own greatest taboo to uphold the rules that forbid it. We commit what we call a wrong to create what we call a right. This is the grand, terrifying bargain of civilization. But where, then, is the line? If morality is a circle that draws its power from the act it most explicitly forbids, is it a circle of protection or a paradox of our own making? Can a system that uses death as its ultimate tool ever truly be called ethical? Or are we simply adorning our deepest instincts with elegant philosophy? This is the uncomfortable heart of the matter. If killing to protect the community is the bedrock of morality, then how is it fundamentally different from the raw, unforgiving logic of the natural world? The wolf culls the sick member of the pack to preserve the whole. The lion kills the cubs of a rival to ensure the survival of his own bloodline. This is biology, pure and simple, survival enacted through violence. It is efficient, it is ruthless, and it is entirely amoral. So, when we perform the same calculus, eliminating one to save many, and call it justice, what separates us? Are we truly transcending our animal nature, or have we simply invented a more elaborate vocabulary to describe the same brutal equation? We have replaced the law of the jungle with the law of the town square, but if both laws ultimately demand a body, is the difference merely one of ceremony? Does morality begin where instinct ends? Or is it just instinct that has learned to talk? Perhaps to untangle this ancient knot, we must look not to the end of life, with all its complex justifications, but to its very beginning. Before the world layers us with its cynicism and compromise, before we learn the arguments for and against the death penalty, we are something else, raw, unfiltered moral sensors. To solve this contradiction, we need to understand how do children, those small, unfinished humans not yet fully programmed by society, react to injustice? What is the pure, uncut response before it is filtered through the prism of law, tradition, and expediency? Do they, in their simple, brutal honesty, show us the true nature of our moral compass? Why does a child, offered 2 pieces of cake, instinctively divide them equally? Why does a toddler, watching one puppet show another unfairly, express clear disapproval, a frown upon their face, not taught, but felt? It appears that from our very first breaths, we are not just learning fairness, we are expecting it. We seem to be born with a deep, intuitive aversion to inequality, a preference for the even split, the balanced scale. This inclination is so immediate, so universal, that it feels less like a lesson and more like a part of our operating system. Is this the biological seed from which the grand, troubled tree of justice grows? Are we, at our core, born to be fair? The baby watches, utterly still, its wide eyes fixed on the scene unfolding between 2 adults. One hand opens to reveal 2 brightly wrapped candies, the other receives only one. There is no sound for a moment, just the quiet of a room holding its breath. Then, the baby's face crumples. It turns away, a small body radiating a profound and unmistakable disgust. It might even cry, a sharp wounded sound that seems too large for such a small person. This is the paradox. The child is not involved. It received no candy, was promised none, and yet the perceived injustice is a personal affront. It is a reaction that feels pure, untaught, a moral reflex as instinctive as flinching from a fall. Why does this tiny human, who has yet to master language or the complexities of social etiquette, possess such a visceral, almost philosophical hatred for unfairness? We are witnessing something ancient in that moment of rejection. It is a spark that seems to ignite long before culture can fully fan it into flame. By the age of just 18 months, long before a child can articulate the word unfair, experiments reveal a preference for puppets who distribute resources equally. By 3, they are active participants in this primitive drama of justice, often refusing a treat altogether if it means another child receives nothing. This is more than mimicry. It is a deep-seated expectation of the world. Scientists can measure it. A quickening heart rate, a change in brainwave patterns, a longer, more intense gaze directed at the unfair distributor. These are not the signals of a learned lesson about sharing. They are the physiological fingerprints of an innate moral sense being violated. It is as if the hardware for fairness comes pre-installed, a fundamental part of our operating system waiting for the software of social norms to be downloaded. Is this the first glimmer of a social contract, written not on parchment, but in our very blood and neurons? If this sense is indeed a part of our biological inheritance, then we should find its footprints pressed into the deepest layers of our past. The archaeological record offers a silent but compelling testimony. In the campsites of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the remains of a successful hunt tell a story not of gluttony for the few, but of shared sustenance for the many. Large animal bones bearing the cut marks of stone tools are found scattered evenly among hearths, suggesting a systematic division of the spoils. There are no grand tombs hoarding wealth, no indicators of a chieftain living in obscene luxury while others starved. Survival was a collective project, and the currency of that collaboration was fairness. An individual who took too much, who hoarded meat or tools, would have been a liability, a rupture in the fragile social fabric that held the group together. Their fate might have been ostracism, a death sentence in a world where the group was life itself. Could it be that our modern outrage at economic disparity is merely the echo of a much older truth, one that understood that the fair distribution of resources was not a lofty ideal, but the very bedrock of survival? This deep-seated impulse does not fade with age. It simply finds new, more complex languages in which to speak. In our modern world, the toddler's cry against the unequal distribution of candy transforms into the passionate outcry of social movements. the march for civil rights, the global protests against economic inequality, the universal hunger for justice. These are not alien concepts imported into the human heart. They are the grown-up, institutionalized versions of that same innate revulsion. We feel a collective shudder when we see power abused, when the vulnerable are exploited, when the scales are rigged. This feeling is the engine of moral progress, the uncomfortable itch that compels us to build legal systems, create declarations of human rights, and strive for a world that better aligns with that primal, childlike expectation of how things ought to be. Our laws, in their ideal form, are nothing more than our collective attempt to codify a feeling we were born with. But what happens when this powerful ancient engine is hijacked? For this sense of fairness has a shadow, a doppelganger that wears its face but serves a far more selfish master. The very same mental machinery that allows a child to detect unfairness can be twisted by prejudice, warped by tribalism, and poisoned by envy. We can be exquisitely sensitive to injustices against ourselves or our group, while remaining utterly blind to those we perpetrate against others. The cry of, "That's not fair," can become the battle cry of the privileged who feel their privilege is under threat, a weapon to maintain an unjust status quo. Is my desire for equality truly a noble pursuit of justice, or is it just a polished version of wanting what someone else has? Is my outrage fueled by a love for fairness, or by a hatred for the person who has more? This is the central flaw in the gem, the crack in our moral foundation. It suggests that the feeling itself is not enough. It is a powerful compass, but it can be magnetized by our own biases. It points a direction, but it does not map the entire ethical terrain. If our innate sense of justice is so easily corrupted, can we truly call it moral? Perhaps to untangle this knot, we must look not to the beginning of our own story, but to the end of another. To understand the raw, uncorrupted potential of this impulse, we might turn our gaze to our enigmatic cousins, the Neanderthals. Their story ended tens of thousands of years ago, a branch of our family tree that stopped growing. For a long time, we imagined them as brutish and simplistic, incapable of the depths of emotion that define our species. But the earth keeps secrets, and bones eventually tell their tales. In a shallow grave in what is now Iraq, archaeologists found the skeleton of an older Neanderthal man, whom they named Shanidar I. His body was a map of a hard life, a crushing blow to the head that likely blinded him in one eye, a withered arm, and most significantly, a devastating injury to his leg and spine that would have left him severely disabled. He could not have hunted. He could not have ranged far for food. He would have been a burden, a drain on the precious resources of a small band fighting for survival in an Ice Age world. Yet, his bones reveal something astonishing. He did not die quickly. His injuries had healed, and he had lived for years after receiving them. His people had fed him, protected him, and carried him with them for a decade or more. There was no obvious benefit to this care, no calculation of reciprocal advantage. This was not a transaction. It was something else entirely. It was an act of care that transcended utility, a commitment to a member of the tribe not for what he could do, but simply because he was. This is not the fairness of distribution, of counting candies or dividing meat. This is a deeper, more profound fairness, the fairness of inherent worth. It is the recognition that a life, even a broken one, has value. In the quiet, steadfast care given to Shanidar, we see a glimmer of a moral world that is not just about equal shares, but about boundless compassion. It forces us to ask a far more difficult question than why we hate unfairness. It makes us wonder if our true nature is not just to reject what is wrong, but to choose unconditionally what is right. And if that capacity for pure, non-transactional care existed in a species so like our own, what does that say about the potential sleeping within us? Is the hatred of unfairness merely the first angry step on a much longer path toward a love that requires no reason? In the deep, quiet earth of a cave in Shanidar, a story is written not in words, but in bone. It is the skeleton of an old man, his bones telling a tale of a hard life and a harder death. But one detail speaks louder than all the others: a withered arm, a crushed eye socket, a leg that would have dragged uselessly behind him. This man, for decades, could not have hunted. He could not have foraged alone. He was, by the ruthless metrics of the prehistoric world, a burden. And yet he lived. He survived into what passed for old age among the Neanderthals. His remains pose a silent, thunderous question that echoes across 50,000 years. In a world of stone and ice, who would carry him? We imagine their world in stark, survivalist tones. It is a world painted in the monochrome of hunger and cold, where every calorie is fought for and weakness is a luxury no one can afford. The law of the wild is simple and brutal. The slow, the sick, the injured fall behind. They become a warning, then a memory. This logic is etched into the DNA of almost every creature that walks, runs, or flies. It is the unfeeling arithmetic of evolution, where energy invested must yield a return. To pour precious resources into a member who cannot contribute is, from this perspective, a fatal error. It is a balance sheet that must always be in the black. So what do we make of the man in the cave? His very existence is a paradox, a crack in the foundation of that cold logic. He is living proof, or rather dying proof, that another equation was at work. Someone brought him water. Someone chewed his food for him. Someone protected him from predators he could no longer fight off. His life was a shared project, a collective effort that defied the selfish gene. This is not an isolated footnote. The Shanidar Cave is not alone in its testimony. Across the scattered outposts of the Neanderthal world, from the forests of Europe to the harsh landscapes of the Near East, archaeologists find these whispers of compassion. There is a child with a congenital brain deformity who was cared for until the age of 5 or 6. There are skeletons showing healed fractures, severe injuries that required weeks of immobility and attention to mend. These are not miracles of spontaneous recovery. They are monuments to patience. They required a knowledge of poultices, perhaps, or an understanding of setting bones. They demanded a rotation of care, a sharing of food from the successful hunt, to feed the one who could not join the next. This was medicine in its most nascent, profound form, the deliberate, skilled act of preventing death from taking a member of the tribe. It was a conscious choice to extend the circle of us to include the one who could no longer keep up. This impulse, this stubborn refusal to abandon our own, did not die with the Neanderthals. It blossomed, it became codified, institutionalized, woven into the very fabric of what we call civilization. We see its direct lineage in the most advanced achievements of our modern world: our sprawling hospitals, our social safety nets, our disability benefits, our endless debates about the right to health care. These are not sudden inventions of the enlightened age. They are the grand, complex cathedrals built upon a foundation laid in the dim light of a limestone cave. They are the same impulse, scaled to the size of a nation. The recognition that a society's strength is not measured by its fittest members, but by how it treats its weakest. The moral arc that bends toward justice may be long, but perhaps its first curve was traced by a Neanderthal hand offering a piece of meat to a crippled elder. And yet, this beautiful legacy forces upon us a deeply unsettling thought. The Neanderthals, for all their compassion, are gone. They walked the earth with us, their cousins, for hundreds of thousands of years. They cared for their wounded. They buried their dead with ceremony. They possessed the spark of empathy that we claim as a cornerstone of our humanity. And then they vanished, extinct. If this profound morality, this care for the vulnerable, is such a powerful evolutionary advantage, why did it not guarantee their survival? Was their compassion perhaps a flaw in a world that ultimately favored a colder, more ruthlessly efficient strategy? Or was it simply not enough? Their fate introduces a troubling ambiguity into our narrative of moral progress. It suggests that goodness is not a ticket to survival, but a choice. a precarious, beautiful, and potentially costly choice. It may not be the engine of evolution, but rather a flower that grows in its soil, subject to the same frosts and droughts. So, does their extinction make their care less noble, or does it make it nobler still? A good deed in a doomed world. This paradox leaves us circling the central mystery. If morality is not a straightforward evolutionary guarantee, what is the glue that holds it in place? Why would a band of hunter-gatherers, living on the razor's edge of survival, consistently choose the harder, more costly path of care? The answer might lie not in a positive impulse, but in a deep, primal fear. The greatest terror in a prehistoric human's life was not the saber-toothed cat or the cave bear, fearsome as they were. It was the prospect of being alone. Exile was not a punishment, it was a death sentence. To be cast out from the warmth of the fire, the safety of the group, the shared language and purpose, was to be rendered a ghost. Your fate was sealed the moment the tribe turned its back. Could it be that our first ethical systems were built not on a principle of love, but on this bedrock of dread? We learned to be good, to be cooperative, to care for the weak, because the alternative was unthinkable. Empathy and altruism became the price of admission for community, the mandatory ticket for staying within the circle of light and life. We took care of each other because we were terrified of what would happen if we didn't. The compassion shown to the Shanidar man was real, its warmth genuine. But was the unspoken context for that warmth the cold fear of being in his place? Is our highest virtue, then, merely a sophisticated negotiation with our deepest fear? And if that is the case, what does that say about the light we see in the darkness of that ancient cave? Is it the pure flame of altruism? Or is it a fire we learned to tend because we were so afraid of the cold? The man had broken the tribe's only law. No one spoke of it. No angry words were hurled. No formal decree was announced. But when the communal meal began and the fire cast its warm, dancing light on the circle of faces, no one moved to make a space for him. No eyes met his. The space around him, once permeable and welcoming, had solidified into a wall of silent, deliberate indifference. He stood there for a long moment, the aroma of cooked meat and roasted roots a cruel mockery. And in that silence, he understood. He was no longer one of them. The expulsion was complete. It was a death, but one where the body continues to walk and breathe. This ancient, silent punishment, exile, may well be the hidden cradle in which our very notion of morality was first rocked to sleep and first awakened screaming. To be cast out is to be untethered from the universe of meaning we call a group. For a creature like us, a hypersocial animal, this is not a social inconvenience. It is a biological catastrophe. Our nervous systems, honed over millennia of interdependence, do not distinguish cleanly between a broken bone and a broken bond. The same neural pathways that flare with the agony of physical injury light up with the searing pain of social rejection. This is not a metaphor. The brain registers the ache of loneliness, the sting of a snub, the cold vacuum of exclusion with the same primal urgency as a physical wound. This shared neural circuitry suggests a profound truth. Our need to belong is as fundamental as our need for food or shelter. It is woven into the very fabric of our biology, a deep ancient imperative whispering a constant fearful question: am I still part of the whole? Is my place secure? This fear is the invisible fence that contains us, long before any written law is ever carved into stone. The archaeological record offers silent, somber testimony to this ancient practice. We find settlements like Skara Brae in Orkney, frozen in time. Within these stone hearths and cramped beds, we can almost hear the echoes of lives lived in close quarters. And sometimes we find a mystery, a dwelling, identical to all others, but abandoned not by disaster or gradual decay. The tools are left, as if the owner simply vanished. In burial sites, we occasionally find a community laid to rest together, but one individual is missing. There is no grave, no marker, no evidence of a respectful send-off into the afterlife. These are the ghosts of prehistory, and their absence speaks volumes. They suggest a practice of formal exclusion so complete it extended even beyond death. To be removed from the memory of the tribe was the ultimate punishment. This was the first moral enforcement, a brutal collective agreement that your actions had severed you from the story of us. It was a verdict delivered not by a judge, but by a community, and its sentence was oblivion. This ancient tool has simply been refined for modern use. We no longer cast people out into the literal wilderness to face saber-tooths and starvation. Instead, we have cultivated subtler, more sophisticated wildernesses. The silent treatment, the icy glare across the dinner table, the deliberate exclusion from a group chat, the professional cold shoulder that ends a career not with a bang, but with a slow, silent freeze. These are the modern instruments of exile. We call it cancellation, ostracism, giving someone the cold shoulder, phrases that chillingly echo the physical act of banishment. We enact these social punishments every day, often without a second thought, enforcing a code of conduct that exists nowhere in writing but everywhere in practice. This fear of rejection, this deep-seated dread of that cold silence, is a powerful motivator. It keeps our sharp opinions sheathed, our selfish impulses in check, our actions aligned with the unwritten rules. It is the quiet, invisible police force of our daily lives, and its primary weapon is the threat of making us disappear. But if our good behavior is primarily fueled by this fear of exile, can we truly call it moral? Or is it merely a sophisticated subconscious survival strategy, a performance we put on to keep our seat by the fire? This is the unsettling question that lurks in the shadow of our social nature. If morality is born from the fear of banishment, then its foundation is not purity of heart, but calculated self-interest. It becomes a transaction, a currency we spend to purchase our place in the safety of the group. We are kind because kindness is reciprocated. We are honest because a reputation for deceit makes one a pariah. We follow the rules to avoid the punishing silence. In this light, the line between a truly moral person and a brilliant social strategist becomes dangerously blurred. Both might perform identical acts of generosity and fairness. One is driven by an internal compass, a genuine belief in the good. The other is driven by an internal calculator, a pragmatic understanding of social economics. From the outside, their actions are indistinguishable. This forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable paradox. Is our highest virtue merely a disguise for our deepest fear? Can an action be truly good if its ultimate goal is self-preservation? Perhaps then, the glimpse of a deeper, truer morality is not found in the grand acts performed for an audience of our peers, but in the quiet, anonymous ones. The impulse to help a stranger who has stumbled on a deserted street with no one there to witness it. The decision to return a lost wallet, not for thanks, but because it feels intrinsically wrong to keep it. The small, unseen kindness offered to someone who can offer nothing in return, not even social approval. These acts provide no obvious evolutionary advantage. They don't secure our status or guarantee reciprocal aid. They are, in the cold calculus of survival, illogical. And yet, we do them. They feel, in a way that is difficult to articulate, more purely moral. They hint at an ethical impulse that exists not just to maintain our membership in a tribe, but one that operates on a different frequency altogether, a connection that transcends the transactional. Is this the flicker of something else, something that exists beyond the economy of social debt? This thought inevitably pulls us toward the next question, one that complicates the very idea of a selfless act. If we help a stranger and feel a warm glow of satisfaction, are we not being rewarded? And if we are rewarded, can the act be truly selfless? The man who was banished from the fire understood the cost of breaking a rule. But what of the one who shares his meal with a starving outsider, a person from another tribe who can offer nothing in return? Is that not a different kind of rule, written in a different, more mysterious language? The act creates a debt, but not one that can ever be repaid in kind. It creates an imbalance, a strange and powerful obligation that twists the simple logic of transaction into something far more profound. So, if morality is not merely the fear of exile, could it be the intricate, often hidden calculus of a debt that can never be settled? You help a stranger ride a fallen motorcycle. He smiles, offers a quick thanks, and rides away into the flow of traffic. No promise to return the favor, no reward. The moment is over, leaving behind only the faint hum of the engine and a quiet internal question. Why did you even do that? For a moment, your actions existed outside the economy of human transaction. They were, it seemed, a pure and simple good. But was that truly the case? Or was this tiny act of kindness part of a much deeper, more ancient calculus, one that quietly blurs the line between moral instinct and a transaction so subtle we've forgotten the currency? This impulse to help, this random altruism, feels uniquely human. In the natural world, such behavior is a rarity, a potential liability. An animal that stops to help another, unrelated creature often does so at its own peril, expending precious energy and attracting unwanted attention. Yet, in us, the impulse is common. Neuroscience offers a glimpse into this machinery. When we perform an act of kindness for a stranger, functional MRI scans reveal a curious symphony within the brain. The limbic system, the seat of our primal emotions, hums with activity. The septal area, a region linked to feelings of bonding and care, lights up. And often there is a flicker in the mesolimbic pathway, the brain's reward circuit, the same system that delights in a good meal or social approval. It releases a trickle of dopamine, a chemical whisper of satisfaction. Is this, then, the hidden transaction? Are we paid in a private currency of warm feelings? Our morality merely a sophisticated pursuit of internal reward? The brain's response suggests that even in solitude, we are never truly acting alone. We are in a constant, silent dialogue with our own neurochemistry, bartering for a moment of peace or a spike of pleasure. To understand the roots of this paradox, we must journey back, long before ledgers and contracts, to the dawn of settled human life. Places like Çatalhöyük, a sprawling Neolithic settlement that thrived in what is now Turkey, offer silent testimony. Here, archaeologists uncover a world without written records, but they find a story told in buried objects. Homes are clustered together, their entrances on the roofs, suggesting a community built on intimate proximity rather than defensive walls. Within these homes they find something telling, artifacts far from their origin, seashells from distant coasts, obsidian glass from volcanic mountains hundreds of miles away. There is no evidence of central markets, no signs of standardized currency. Instead, anthropologists theorize a culture built on gift-giving. This was not trade. A gift, in its purest form, is given without a stipulated return. It creates a bond, a vague and open-ended obligation that strengthens the social fabric. It says, we are connected. The value was not in the object itself, but in the connection it forged, a transaction perhaps, but one where the currency was belonging itself. The gift was an investment in the community's resilience, a shared understanding that today's giving might be tomorrow's receiving, not from the same person, but from the woven whole. This prehistoric echo suggests our moral impulse might be rooted not in a calculation of individual gain, but in a profound understanding of collective survival. This ancient thread weaves itself into the modern tapestry of our civil society. Look at the entire architecture of volunteerism, international aid, and anonymous donation. Millions of people give their time, money, or blood for causes and people they will never meet. They tutor children in another city, donate to disaster relief on another continent, contribute to open-source software for users they will never know. This is altruism operating at a massive, impersonal scale, a system of ethics that seems to transcend any conceivable mechanism of direct reciprocity. It is a testament to an evolved capacity for empathy that can extend beyond kin and tribe to encompass a stranger, a concept, a future generation. It is humanity building a cradle for itself, a network of support that exists precisely because we have learned that survival is not a solitary game. This system functions on a belief in a common good, a moral landscape where the greatest reward is the perpetuation of a world where kindness is possible. And yet, a shadow of a doubt persists. But is this impulse truly selfless? The ancient gift, while creating bonds, also created status and obligation. The modern volunteer, while serving others, might also be building their resume or soothing their conscience. Is our so-called virtue just a more sophisticated survival strategy? A way to build social capital, to broadcast our worth as a cooperative partner, to bank goodwill in the community? Perhaps the warm glow of dopamine is the evolutionary prize for playing the game correctly, a biochemical incentive system designed to make us behave in ways that enhance our reputation and, ultimately, our genetic legacy. The act of helping becomes a form of advertising, a signal that says, "I am a good ally, a reliable member of the tribe." In this light, the man who picks up the motorcycle is not just being kind. He is polishing his social standing, even if no one is there to see it. He is investing in the idea of himself as a good person, and that idea is a valuable asset. So, is the distinction between a moral act and a social transaction merely a matter of perspective? Is what we call our conscience simply the internalized voice of the tribe, keeping us in line? Perhaps the only place where this question can be truly tested is in the absolute absence of an audience. The moment of help becomes a kind of litmus test for the soul. When the cameras are off, when the reputation cannot be enhanced, when the recipient cannot thank us, and the community cannot praise us, what then remains of our urge to be good? Is it still there, a quiet, stubborn light? Or does it flicker and die without the oxygen of social validation? The true nature of our morality might be revealed not in the grand, recorded gestures, but in the smallest, most invisible choices. The coin dropped in an empty hat, the righted motorcycle for a stranger who didn't even see you do it. In that silent space, are we finally acting from a place of pure ethics, or are we merely satisfying the most demanding audience of all, the one that lives inside our own head? This leads us to a deeper, more unsettling layer. If our best behavior is so tied to being seen, what does that say about the source of our goodness? Does our moral compass actually point toward the approval of others? And what happens when the eyes upon us are finally closed? He walks down the street, a man alone with his thoughts and a crumpled wrapper in his hand. The gesture is almost unconscious, a flick of the wrist. The paper flutters to the ground, a tiny, insignificant rebellion against order. A moment later, another figure turns the corner. Their eyes meet. A silent, instantaneous transaction occurs. The walker hesitates, a flicker of something. Shame, annoyance, calculation, crosses his face. He bends down, retrieves the litter, and stuffs it into his pocket. The social contract, momentarily voided, is abruptly reinstated. Not by a law, not by a fine, but by the simple, unbearable weight of another's gaze. What is this strange power, this invisible force field generated by the human eye that can command, shame, and reform us in an instant? Beneath the surface of this everyday social ballet lies a deep and ancient biological wiring. We are, it seems, built to be seen. Our nervous system hosts a specialized social surveillance network, a silent alarm that trips the moment a pair of eyes lands upon us. Functional MRI scans reveal a fascinating choreography within the brain. The presence of a direct gaze activates the superior temporal sulcus, a region dedicated to deciphering where others are looking and what their intentions might be. This, in turn, signals the amygdala, our ancient sentinel for threat and arousal, and engages the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive control and social compliance. It is a rapid-fire neural parliament, debating the social cost of our next move. This is not a conscious thought process. It is a physiological reaction. The gaze of another triggers a low-grade stress response, a primal alert that we are being evaluated, that our status within the tribe is on the line. This subconscious calculation pushes us toward pro-social behavior, toward conformity, not out of deep virtue, but out of a hardwired impulse to belong, and avoid the peril of ostracization? Could it be that our best behavior is often just a sophisticated neural panic response to the threat of social exclusion? This biological impulse finds a chilling and powerful echo in the silent stares of our deepest past. Long before written laws or modern moral codes, ancient civilizations seem to intuitively understand the coercive power of the watchful eye. In the dust of Sumer and the sands of Egypt, archaeologists have unearthed artifacts that speak to this primordial understanding. Divinity was often rendered with enormous, hypnotic eyes, wide, unblinking orbs of lapis lazuli or obsidian that seemed to follow you across the room. These statues of gods and goddesses were not merely representations, they were instruments of social control. Placed in temples and public squares, they served as a constant, inescapable reminder of a supernatural witness. The message was simple and terrifying. You are always being watched. This feeling of metaphysical surveillance, of an all-seeing judgment, was a far more effective tool for regulating behavior than any human guard could ever be. It policed not only actions but thoughts, fostering a society that governed itself from the inside out, under the unrelenting gaze of stone eyes. Did these ancient artists, in carving those vast, piercing eyes, somehow codify a fundamental truth about the human psyche, that we are incapable of feeling truly alone? The modern world, for all its complexity, continues to prove the enduring potency of this simple principle. The most compelling evidence comes from elegantly simple experiments that strip away culture and religion, leaving only the bare geometry of a gaze. Researchers found that simply placing a poster featuring a pair of stylized, watchful eyes above an honesty box in a break room dramatically increased the amount of money people paid for their coffee. In bicycle parking areas, such images reduced theft. In public parks, they curtailed littering. The effect is subconscious and remarkably robust. It is not a picture of a god or a government official. It is just a pair of eyes. Yet, that is enough. It taps directly into that ancient neural pathway, triggering the faint, automatic whisper of a social synapse firing, "Someone is here. Someone sees you." This suggests that the feeling of being observed is, in itself, one of the most powerful motivators of moral behavior we possess. It is a force that operates below the level of reason, a ghost of social expectation that haunts our every public move. If a mere image can so effortlessly command our conscience, what does that say about the foundation of that conscience? Is it built on virtue or on vigilance? This, of course, leads us to a deeply unsettling question about the nature of our own goodness. If our best behavior is so easily switched on by the implied presence of an audience, can we truly call it moral? Or have we merely perfected the art of social performance? The man who picks up his litter only when seen is not necessarily a good environmentalist. He is an adept social navigator, skilled at managing his public image and avoiding disapproval. This is a morality of the surface, a reaction to external pressure rather than an expression of an internal compass. It is a pragmatic calculation of reward and punishment, stripped of any deeper ethical commitment. The gaze, in this light, becomes not a mirror reflecting our inner virtue, but a spotlight exposing our desire to be perceived as virtuous. So where does that leave the concept of character? If a person is honest only when watched, are they truly an honest person, or are they just a clever actor on a stage that is never fully dark? Perhaps the truest test of an internal moral compass, then, is not how we behave under the watchful eyes of others, but what we do in their absolute, guaranteed absence. To understand the depth of our own integrity, we might look not to the act of picking up litter, but to the intimate, private act of the lie. Why does a lie, even a small, undetectable one, so often carry a physical cost? It knots the stomach, quickens the pulse, and activates the same ancient neural pathways that scream of physical danger. The brain, it seems, registers deception as a fundamental threat. This suggests that truth-telling might be more than a lofty ideal. It could be a default state, a biological imperative for a hypersocial species whose survival depends on trust and cohesive group function. The stress of a lie, therefore, may not be the fear of getting caught, but the deep somatic dissonance of operating against our own design. Is honesty, then, not just a moral choice, but the ultimate state of physiological harmony? And if that is the case, what does the silent, weightless ease of a truth told in the dark feel like when told for no one's benefit but our own? The heart begins its frantic percussion against the ribs, a primal drumbeat sounding an alarm. A faint, cool film of moisture blooms across the palms. The breath catches, held hostage for a fraction of a second too long. This is the body of a person about to tell a lie. It is not the body of a calm, calculating strategist, but of a creature poised for flight, bracing for impact. The physiological response is almost indistinguishable from that of our ancient ancestor, who just heard a twig snap in a dense, unfamiliar forest. Why would the simple act of uttering a falsehood, a feat performed with such casual frequency in our daily social choreography, trigger such a deep, visceral state of high alert? The answer is etched into our very biology, whispered through the artifacts of our past, and amplified by the complex moral web of modern society. It is a story of internal conflict, where the self becomes both the hunter and the hunted. At the most fundamental biological level, a lie is not an abstract concept, but a tangible, neurological event. It begins in the brain's command center, the prefrontal cortex. This region, responsible for executive functions like impulse control and complex planning, lights up with activity. It is working overtime, performing a delicate and demanding ballet. Its first task is to suppress the truth, a default and neurologically efficient pathway. Then it must construct and hold the alternative narrative, the fiction, keeping it separate and intact. Simultaneously, it must monitor the listener's reaction, ready to adjust the performance in real time. This immense cognitive load is the mental equivalent of juggling knives while walking a tightrope. The brain is expending significantly more energy to maintain the deception than it would to state a simple fact. But the body is not a passive spectator to this neural drama. The autonomic nervous system, the ancient pilot of our most basic survival functions, interprets this internal conflict as a threat. The sympathetic nervous system, the one that primes us for fight or flight, kicks into gear. It signals the adrenal glands, and a trickle of cortisol and adrenaline enters the bloodstream. The heart rate accelerates to pump more oxygen to the muscles. Palms sweat to improve grip. The senses sharpen. The body is mobilizing its resources for a confrontation that exists entirely within the realm of social interaction. It is preparing for a battle where the only weapon is a word, and the only casualty might be trust. Is this physiological panic, then, the body's innate protest against its own disharmony? If this internal conflict is so deeply wired, how far back does this dance with deception truly go? We cannot dig up a fossilized lie. Deception leaves no direct archaeological record. Its texture is too soft, its form too ephemeral to be preserved in sediment. Yet, we find its ghost imprinted on the objects our ancestors left behind. Consider the ochre-stained clay, used to create ancient masks, or the pigments for elaborate body paint. These were not merely decorations, they were tools of transformation, a way to consciously project an identity that was different from the self within. To wear a mask is to tell a visual lie, to say, I am the spirit, the animal, the god, while knowing you are merely the human. In the flickering firelight of a cave, a shaman adorned in the likeness of a bison was engaging in a sacred deception, a collective agreement to believe the untruth for a greater purpose. Further back, a hominid might have feigned ignorance of a food source, deliberately leading a rival away from a fruiting tree with a casual, disinterested gait. This required a theory of mind, the understanding that others have beliefs, intentions, and knowledge different from one's own, which can be manipulated. The capacity for deception, therefore, may have been a cruel but necessary driver of our intelligence. Does this mean our famed cognitive sophistication is, in part, built upon a foundation of socially aware deceit? This ancient capacity collides violently with the world we have built. Modern society operates on a fragile compact of trust. Our institutions, from banks to legal systems, and our personal relationships, from friendships to marriages, are built on the assumption that people will generally tell the truth. A lie is thus framed not just as a personal failing, but as a tear in the social fabric. We are taught from childhood that honesty is a virtue and deception a sin. We internalize this as a moral compass. And so, when we choose to lie, we are not merely managing a cognitive load or triggering a stress response. We are activating a deep, internal system of moral self-monitoring. We feel a pang of guilt, a knot of shame. That surge of stress is no longer just about the fear of being caught. It is the discomfort of violating our own code of ethics. It is the self passing judgment on the self. We become the defendant and the prosecutor in a private, instantaneous courtroom of the mind. Yet, we still do it. We tell white lies to spare feelings. We exaggerate to impress. We omit to avoid conflict. We have made deception a social skill, a necessary lubricant, even as our bodies and our conscience rebel against it. This creates a profound dissonance. If the stress of lying is the body's rebellion and the conscience's sting, why does the practice remain so stubbornly, ubiquitously human? This tension leads us to a troubling, counterintuitive possibility. What if the gnawing feeling of wrongness we associate with a lie is not the voice of some pure, innate morality? What if it is merely a sophisticated, internalized fear of social consequence? Is our guilt truly a moral compass? Or is it just the ghost of punishment, a preemptive flinch anticipating the blow of being discovered, ostracized, or shamed? We learn the rules of our tribe so thoroughly that they become part of us. The policeman moves from standing on the street corner to taking up residence inside our head. The stress, then, could be less about a violation of a universal truth and more about a violation of a social contract, a fear of exile from the tribe. If the pang of guilt is simply the ego's fear of getting caught and facing rejection, does that make the feeling any less real or any less effective at regulating behavior? Can a moral act still be considered moral if its primary motivation is self-preservation? Perhaps the only way to untangle this knot, to separate the fear of consequence from a purer sense of ethical wrong, is to observe a community stripped of formal laws where only social norms remain. Imagine a village with no written code, no police, no courts. In such a place, a lie still carries weight. Its discovery would lead not to a cell, but to a loss of reputation, a erosion of trust, a subtle shift in how one is looked at and spoken to. The stress of lying in such an environment might be entirely tied to the risk of this social damage. Yet, might there also be a deeper, more intrinsic discomfort? A violation of a fundamental human connection that exists even when no one is watching? To understand this, we must look beyond the individual and into the heart of the collective, to see how our sense of right and wrong itself might be shaped by the very groups we form. Does our morality simply mirror the rules of the tribe, or does it whisper of something more ancient, something we carried with us long before we built our first village? The circle of figures closes in, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange dance of a communal fire. In the center stands one of their own, accused of taking what was not his. There are no uniforms here, no badges of office, no gilded scales of justice. There is only the cool night air, the shared breath of the tribe, and the heavy weight of a decision to be made. A silent consensus forms, not through decree, but through a subtle language of exchanged glances, a collective sigh, a unified understanding of a boundary crossed. This is the birthplace of justice, not in a marble hall, but in the primal theater of human connection. It feels instinctive, this deep-seated sense of right and wrong that guides their judgment. But is it? Or are we witnessing the fragile, early scaffolding of a concept we would later call morality, painstakingly assembled piece by piece over millennia? Does our ethics evolve? To answer, we must first look inward, into the very biology that binds us. Within the human brain resides a peculiar and powerful engine for social cohesion, a heightened capacity for empathy and consensus building that sets us apart from even our closest primate cousins. A chimpanzee troop operates on a framework of power, alliance, and immediate retaliation. A transgression is met with a shriek, a bite, a display of dominance. It is justice as immediate reaction, a personal settling of scores. But in that prehistoric circle, something different is occurring. The individuals are not just reacting to a stolen tool or a snatched piece of food. They are considering the stability of the group, the precedent being set, the web of trust that allows them to hunt together and survive the winter. This is the emergence of a silent law, a set of unspoken rules governing reciprocity and fairness. It is made possible by mirror neurons that allow us to feel the sting of betrayal even when we are not the victim, and by a brain capable of running complex simulations of social outcomes. We are not merely reacting. We are negotiating a shared reality. This biological toolkit for empathy is the fertile soil from which the seed of morality could first sprout. But is a seed the same as the full-grown tree? The silent laws of the tribe needed a voice, a way to echo through generations. This is where the earth itself begins to speak, offering up clues from a time before ink and parchment. Consider the silent, stoic sentinels of Stonehenge, their massive lintels pointing to the heavens. This was not merely a calendar of stone, it was a cathedral of consensus. Its construction required a staggering level of social organization, a shared purpose, a hierarchy of labor, and an agreed-upon system of knowledge that transcended any single individual. To coordinate the quarrying, transport, and erection of these monoliths, there must have been rules. There must have been leaders, not just of brute force, but of agreed-upon authority. There must have been consequences for those who did not contribute, rewards for those who did. Similarly, the remains of early sedentary settlements, like Çatalhöyük, reveal a world of intricate social contracts. Houses are built wall to wall, with entrances through the roof. This architecture implies an incredible degree of mutual trust and a collective understanding of boundaries, both physical and social. The famous wall paintings, of hunting parties, of vultures swirling around headless corpses, are more than art. They are narratives. They are the codification of a world view, the stories a tribe tells itself about what is sacred, what is profane, what is allowed, and what is punished. These sites are the fossilized imprint of a moral code, the first time abstract notions of right and wrong were given a permanent, tangible form. The feeling was being given a structure, and that structure would be refined, hardened, and rationalized over centuries until it found its ultimate expression. The modern courtroom. If the tribal circle was the heart of morality, beating, emotional, immediate, then the court is its logical brain. It is the systemization of that ancient, gut-feeling right and wrong into a mechanism that can be examined, debated, and applied with cold neutrality. The witness stand is a ritualized space for empathy, where one is compelled to see through another's eyes. The jury is the embodiment of tribal consensus, distilled into 12 voices. The law itself is nothing more than a vast, evolving library of all our previous collective decisions. Our best attempt to translate the messy, emotional language of morality into the precise syntax of legal code. It takes the raw, intuitive justice of the firelight and tries to cool it into something objective, something that can be weighed and measured. It is the grand, ongoing project of building a ladder of reason up from the swamp of our instincts. But in this magnificent construction, a troubling paradox emerges. If morality is such a deep, innate part of our biological inheritance, why must we work so desperately to cage it in such an elaborate system of laws? Why must we constantly reinforce it with the threat of prison, the authority of judges, the complexity of constitutions? This is the counter-argument that whispers from the shadows of our legal edifices. Perhaps what we call morality was never an instinct waiting to be unlocked, but a cultural technology that we invented. Like the wheel or writing, it was a tool for survival, a brilliant adaptation to the pressures of living in large groups. The gut feeling of fairness might not be the cause of our ethics, but its effect, a pleasant emotional echo that our cultures learn to stimulate to ensure compliance. We feel it is innate because the lesson has been drilled into us for 10,000 years, woven into every story, every song, every childhood lesson. The law, then, is not the extension of an inner moral compass, but its replacement. It is the exoskeleton we built because our internal skeleton was too weak to support the weight of civilization. So, which is it? Are we born good and build courts to perfect our goodness, or are we born neutral and build courts to contain our chaos? To untangle this, perhaps we must look not to the end product of our evolution, the sophisticated adult, but to its beginning. We must look to the creatures who have not yet been fully woven into the cultural tapestry, who operate with a purer, less polished version of human nature. We must watch the children at play in the schoolyard, in a game where no referee blows a whistle and no parent is watching from the sidelines. They are the living echo of that prehistoric circle, the perfect subjects in the grand experiment of human ethics. They have not yet learned the intricate dance of the law, but they already feel the music. What happens when the game is unfair? Do they walk away? Do they cheat to win? Or is there something else, a deep-seated impulse for fair play that demands no audience and expects no reward? What compels a kindness that has nothing to gain? Two children stand at opposite ends of a worn piece of rope, a line of dust scratched into the earth between them. One is larger, his frame thick with the easy strength of a few extra years. The other, smaller, grips the rope with a determination that tightens the muscles in his forearms. The obvious outcome hangs in the air, a foregone conclusion, but then the larger boy does something strange. He leans back, his weight a promise of victory, but his arms tell a different story. He applies just enough force to create a tension, a genuine struggle, but not enough to win. He is, for all intents and purposes, pretending to be weak. He is engineering fairness into a system tilted in his favor. He is choosing the integrity of the game over the cheap thrill of an unchallenged win. This is not a simple act of pity. It is a complex moral calculation, a quiet rebellion against the raw, uncomplicated laws of nature. Why would any creature, programmed for survival and dominance, willingly handicap itself? What ancient, profound wiring compels us to sometimes prefer a beautiful, balanced struggle over a hollow, certain victory? This act of self-handicapping is a biological anomaly, a splash of unexpected color on the gray canvas of natural selection. In the animal kingdom, competition is a brutal, zero-sum game. The predator does not feign a limp to give the prey a sporting chance. The stronger alpha does not step aside to let the weaker one eat first. Victory is everything. Resources are scarce. To win is to live. To lose is to die, or at best, to fade into genetic obscurity. Yet, here we are. Humans, and a vanishingly small number of other social species like bonobos or certain canines, display this curious behavior. It is a glitch in the matrix of selfish genes, a behavior that suggests our moral framework is not merely a polished veneer of socialization, but may be etched into our very biology. It hints at an evolutionary advantage not of the individual, but of the group, a recognition that trust, cooperation, and perceived fairness are the invisible currencies that build societies stronger than any lone victor. Is this higher ethical tier, this willingness to subordinate the primal urge to win, the very bedrock upon which we built everything that separates us from the chaos of mere nature? If we dig into the earth, sifting through the layers of time not for bones or tools of survival, but for toys, we find a startling truth. In the dust of Mesopotamia, archaeologists unearthed the world's oldest known game, a set of beautifully crafted dice made of bone and precious stone. These were not instruments of war or hunting. They were tools for a very human invention, the structured, rule-bound game. These ancient cubes, etched with symbols, speak of a world where our ancestors gathered not just to eat or procreate, but to engage in a shared fiction governed by mutual consent. The role of the die was an acceptance of chance, a submission to an agreed-upon authority outside oneself. This suggests that the concept of fairness, of a level playing field created by arbitrary rules, is not a modern luxury, but a deep, ancient human craving. Long before we codified laws for justice, we were crafting them for play. Were these games the primordial sandbox where we first practiced, in a consequence-free environment, the delicate art of living together by a shared code? Modern developmental psychology offers a window into this innate drive. In laboratory experiments, young children, often before they can fully articulate the concept of justice, will readily reject an unfair reward. They will refuse a greater treat if they see another child receiving less for the same task. They will often sacrifice their own advantage to maintain the equilibrium of the game, to preserve the social contract. This is not taught, it is observed, an emergent property of the human mind. It reflects an intrinsic valuation of fairness that transcends immediate material gain. The game itself, its health, its continuity, its joy, becomes a prize more valuable than the trophy at the end. It is a stunning capacity to hold two ideas at once, the desire to win and the understanding that some victories are not worth having if they poison the well from which all future play must drink. Does this mean that our default setting, beneath the layers of avarice and competition, is not chaos, but a yearning for equitable order? Yet the shadow is always cast by the light. For every child who pretends to be weak to ensure a good game, there is another who sneakily moves their piece forward when no one is looking, who cheats to claim the prize, who hoards the toys and lies to keep them. This duality is the central drama of human morality. Is ethics a universal instinct, a seed planted in every human heart, waiting only for the right conditions of nurture and community to blossom? Or is it a cultural technology, developed unevenly across societies and individuals, a fragile set of instructions that must be carefully taught and vigilantly maintained, forever at risk of being overwritten by the older, more insistent software of self-interest? The cheat and the fair player emerge from the same evolutionary cradle. They are two potentialities within us all, a constant internal tug-of-war. So, what determines which side of the rope we choose to pull on? Is it character, education, or something far older, etched into our history by a fundamental shift in how we related to the world and to each other? Perhaps the answer to this paradox is not found in the timeless realm of instinct or the controlled environment of a child's game, but in the gritty, transformative turning point of our history. A moment when the abstract concept of fairness was forced to take a concrete, material form. This shift occurred when we stopped merely taking from the world and began to plan for it, when we transitioned from the fleeting chase of the hunter to the patient, anxious custody of the herder and the farmer. The hunter's morality is that of the immediate moment, the respect for the prey, the sharing of the kill amongst the present band. But what happens when the kill is not consumed but contained? When the grain is not gathered but planted and stored? This new reality birthed two revolutionary and burdensome concepts: property and responsibility. With them came the inevitable conflict, and from that conflict, the absolute necessity for a new kind of rule. Not just the unwritten rules of a game, but the formalized, non-negotiable laws of ownership, inheritance, and theft. Fairness was no longer just about how we play. It was about what we can keep, what we owe, and what is truly, durably ours. Did this monumental shift, from the ethics of the hunter to the ethics of the herdsman, force our innate sense of fairness to evolve from a feeling into a system, from a personal choice into a social contract? And if so, does that mean our modern notion of justice is ultimately built upon the foundation of offense? The hunter stands over the fallen gazelle, his breath a pale cloud in the chill dawn air. The act is complete, the swift violence already a memory in the muscles of his arm. But the true ritual is only beginning. With a blade of sharpened stone, he begins the work of division, not for himself, but for the group. The haunches for the elder who can no longer run, the rich liver for the woman nursing a new life, the tough sinews for the toolmaker. This is not charity. It is the unspoken, absolute law of existence. The meat is shared because the hunger is shared, because the danger is collective, because tomorrow, His own life may depend on the strength of the very hands that receive his offering. The morality here is immediate, visceral, and woven into the fabric of mutual need. It is the ethics of the hunt. Now picture this same man's descendant 1,000 generations later. He stands not in a wild grassland, but in a field of his own making, golden with domesticated grain. The sun beats down on the fruits of his calculated labor, on the stored water, on the fence posts that mark a boundary against the world. He has stockpiled what the earth has yielded. And when the harvest is in, he does not call the village to divide it. He carries it to a storage pit, covers it with a heavy stone, and perhaps for the first time, he invents a lock. He begins to draft rules: who may take, how much, and when. His morality has shifted from the ethics of the hunter to the ethics of the herdsman. It is no longer about sharing a common fate, but about protecting a private future. This fundamental pivot, from a morality of we to a morality of I and mine, may be the most consequential journey humanity ever undertook. It rewired our societies, our gods, and our very souls. This shift is etched not just in stone tools and seed fossils, but deep within our biology. Our brains are ancient artifacts, layered with the instincts of our long foraging past. In the precarious world of the hunter-gatherer, where a single failed hunt could mean starvation, sharing was the ultimate risk management strategy. It was a biological imperative disguised as a social virtue. Neurochemistry rewarded it. The act of giving likely triggered cascades of neurotransmitters that reinforced bonding and cooperation. This share or perish ethos was a brilliant adaptation to an environment of scarcity and immediate danger. The self was the group, and the group was the self. Their morality was a direct reflection of their ecology, a fluid, dynamic contract with the land and each other, renewed with every successful hunt and every shared meal. But then, we began to herd the beasts and till the soil. The Neolithic Revolution was not merely a change in menu, it was a revolution in the human mind. For the first time, we produced a surplus. We could create more than we immediately consumed. This abundance, paradoxically, created a new kind of scarcity, the scarcity of controlled resources. The archaeological record tells this story silently but profoundly. We see the emergence of permanent settlements, of storage facilities, and with them, the first evidence of pronounced social inequality. Graves from this period begin to show stark contrasts. Some bodies buried with nothing, others accompanied by exquisite pots, polished jade, and symbols of authority. The shared peril of the hunt had been replaced by the private accumulation of the farm. This new, sedentary wealth needed guarding, both from the elements and from envious neighbors. And so the simple instinctual ethics of sharing began to calcify into something more complex, codified law. Morality was no longer just an impulse. It became a system. It had to be written down, argued over, and enforced, because the natural incentive had flipped from, we need each other to survive, to, I need to protect what is mine from you. This ancient tension between the hunter's gift and the farmer's granary is the bedrock of our modern world. Our entire economic and legal architecture is an elaborate extension of that first storage pit with its heavy stone lid. We speak of property rights, inheritance tax, and social contracts. We have constructed vast, intricate philosophies of justice, distributive justice, social justice, to manage the inequalities that surplus itself made possible. These are not absolute truths discovered in the cosmos. They are the evolved, often clumsy tools for managing the profound social friction that began when one person could, for the first time, own more than another. Our modern moral debates about wealth redistribution, welfare, and privilege are, in essence, a sprawling, millennia-long argument between the ghost of the hunter, who insists on the primal logic of sharing, and the reality of the farmer, who insists on the practical logic of ownership. This leads us to an unsettling, deeply ironic possibility. What if the very notion of a selfless, universal morality is itself a product of selfish, conditional necessity? What if we are inherently good only when we are collectively poor? The hunter's sharing is born from mutual dependence, a brilliant strategy for survival in a world without guarantees. It is a morality of necessity, but once the granary is full, that immediate, visceral need for the other evaporates. The community can fragment into households, the households into individuals. The ethics of the hunt become obsolete, even detrimental, to the individual sitting atop a surplus. So, does morality then become unnecessary? Or does it simply transform into a new, more abstract, and perhaps more fragile thing? A set of rules designed not to bind us together in mutual aid, but to keep us from tearing each other apart over our accumulated hoards? Is our highest virtue merely a ghost of our oldest necessity? And so, a new problem was born. How to make people obey a rule when the immediate life or death incentive to do so has vanished? How to convince the wealthy farmer to share when his survival no longer depends on the hunter's strength? The answer, it seems, was to tell a story. To weave the new, inconvenient rules not as human inventions for social control, but as divine mandates from a higher order. To take the ethics of the herdsman and cloak them in the sacred power of the hunter's ancient spirits. For a morality to survive its own utility, it must be sung, not just stated. It must be etched into the stars, not just onto clay tablets. But can a virtue remain virtuous when it requires the threat of eternal punishment to be sustained? If we need gods to be good, what does that say about the goodness itself? The moon hangs low and heavy over the clearing, a perfect, luminous eye in the velvet darkness. Below, a member of a tribe untouched by modern civilization pauses before speaking. His words, under the watchful gaze of the full moon, are measured, truthful, and careful. For his people believe that the light of the moon is not merely reflected sunlight, but the collective gaze of their ancestors, seeing all, knowing all. To lie under such a light is an impossibility. It is not a written law, but a felt presence, an invisible architecture of accountability built from myth and moonlight. This is perhaps the oldest and most universal of human intuitions, the idea that we are being watched. This sensation, the prickling feeling on the back of your neck when you are alone and consider a transgression, is not just a cultural artifact. It is etched into our very biology. Deep within the human brain, the lateral prefrontal cortex flickers to life when we believe we are being observed. This region is our internal auditor, the seat of self-control and social compliance. Evolutionary psychologists suggest this is a powerful adaptation. In the fragile early human communities, where reputation was survival and a single selfish act could lead to ostracization and death, the constant low-grade anxiety of being watched served a vital purpose. It was a psychological immune system, a preemptive strike against behaviors that would get us caught. It didn't matter if the eyes belonged to a tribesman hidden in the bushes or a spirit thought to dwell in the wind, the effect was the same. Conformity increased. Cooperation thrived. The fear of invisible punishment, it seems, was a cornerstone in building the first societies. So, is our conscience merely a sophisticated alarm system? A biological response to the perceived threat of social consequence, even when that consequence is delivered by an unseen hand? Long before the written word could codify laws, humanity was building monuments to this very idea. On a windswept hill in modern-day Turkey, the staggering stones of Göbekli Tepe rise from the earth. Dating back over 11 millennia, this is not a city, not a fortress, but a temple complex. Its construction predates agriculture, turning the traditional narrative of civilization on its head. It suggests that perhaps humanity first came together not to farm, but to worship, not to build granaries, but to erect a stage for the gods. The intricate carvings of animals and abstract symbols speak of a world saturated with the supernatural. Here, in this sacred space, the community would have gathered to reinforce a shared belief in powers that governed their world and judged their actions. Göbekli Tepe stands as silent, stone-clad proof that the need for a supernatural witness to human morality is ancient, perhaps even fundamental to our social structure. It was an externalized ethical framework, a set of rules written not on parchment, but in the stars, enforced not by chieftains, but by deities. Did these stones give birth to the gods? Or did the gods command the raising of the stones, all to keep the darkness within us at bay? In our modern, electrified world, the moon is just a rock in space, and the gods of Göbekli Tepe are museum exhibits. Organized religion, once the undisputed architect of moral order, has receded from the center of public life for many, and yet the deep-seated wiring remains. The feeling of being watched has simply found new vessels. We curate our lives for the omniscient audience of social media, a digital pantheon that judges and rewards. We speak of the court of public opinion and the arc of the moral universe, secular echoes of ultimate judgment. The language of karma, a cosmic system of ethical cause and effect, permeates even the most agnostic of worldviews. The underlying psychological mechanism, the desire to be good because someone or something is keeping score, persists with remarkable tenacity. We may have traded the eyes of ancestors in the moon for the ever-present lens of the camera phone, but are we still performing for an invisible audience, seeking validation and fearing judgment from a source outside ourselves? This reliance on a watcher, however, leads us to a profound and unsettling paradox. If moral behavior is so intrinsically tied to the perception of surveillance, what does that say about the authenticity of our virtue? Is morality, at its core, merely fear wearing the mask of piety? If the only thing stopping a person from acting unethically is the belief that a divine camera is recording their every move, can we truly call them a good person? Or are they simply a prudent one, a calculated follower of cosmic rules? This questions the very location of goodness. Does it emanate from an innate, humanistic core, a genuine empathy and desire for fairness? Or is it a foreign implant, a cultural and psychological graft, designed by evolution and religion to keep our baser instincts in check? When the lights go out and we are truly, utterly alone, with no fear of divine retribution or social shame, what remains of our moral compass? Is there a voice that speaks for justice, or only the silence of an empty room? Perhaps, in the dawn of humanity, morality did begin as a simple, pragmatic fear, a necessary trick to ensure survival in a world of limited resources and unlimited dangers. It was the price of admission to the tribe, the ticket to safety. But that cannot be the entire story, for that fear, over millennia, has been woven into something far more complex. It has been ritualized in moonlight ceremonies, carved into ancient pillars, and preached from pulpits. It has been internalized, becoming a part of our emotional and psychological fabric. The watcher may have started as an external threat, but has it, in some way, become integrated into who we are? The challenge of our age is that the traditional watchers, the gods, the spirits, the rigid structures of organized religion have, for many, lost their power and credibility. The moon has been mapped. The temples are tourist attractions. So, where does that leave us? We are left in a silent room, the watchful eyes of old fading into shadow. We have dismantled the panopticon of the gods, believing ourselves to be free. But in the ensuing quiet, a new question whispers, one that is far more demanding than any divine commandment. If we are truly alone, and no one is watching, then for whom do we choose to be good? The rain falls in thick gray sheets, turning the earth to a churning, bloody mud. The air is a symphony of screams and the low, percussive thump of artillery. In the midst of this chaos, a figure moves, not away from the danger, but toward its heart. He is not a soldier. His uniform bears no insignia. He is an atheist, a man who has long since concluded that the universe is a beautiful, indifferent machine, devoid of any divine audience. Yet here he is, crawling on his belly through the muck, dragging a medical kit behind him. He reaches a young soldier, his leg a ruin of flesh and fabric. There is no one to see this act, no promise of a heavenly reward, no fear of hellish punishment. If he is caught, he will be shot. If he succeeds, no one will know. When asked later, his reasoning is not a grand philosophical treatise. It is a quiet, almost bewildered shrug. It was the thing to do. It is a statement that contains no dogma, only a deep, unshakable conviction. It raises a question that echoes far beyond the battlefield. From where does this compulsion toward goodness spring, if not from the command of a god? We are often told that morality is a fragile vase, gifted to us by religion, and that without a divine hand to steady it, it would shatter into a million pieces of self-interest. But what if the vase was not a gift, but something we fashioned ourselves from the very clay of our being? The story of our goodness, it seems, may be written in a language older than Scripture, etched into the very wiring of our brains. When the atheist medic helps the wounded soldier, his body is undergoing a silent chemical ceremony. Deep within his skull, in the ancient reward centers of the brain, neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin flood his synapses. This is not a cold, calculated transaction for a future paradise. It is an immediate biological reward for cooperation and altruism. It is the same warm glow we feel when we give a gift, offer a comforting word, or return a lost wallet. Evolution, in its ruthless pragmatism, seems to have stumbled upon a brilliant strategy. A species that finds pleasure in helping one another is a species more likely to survive. The feeling of "it was the thing to do" is not just a thought, it is a sensation, a deeply ingrained biological push toward the prosocial. Could it be that our highest virtues are, at their core, a sophisticated survival mechanism, a way to ensure the tribe, and thus the individual, endures? This biological impulse leaves its mark not just in our neurons but in the very dust of our history. Long before cathedrals scraped the sky or holy texts were inscribed, humans were gathering around fires, sharing meat from a successful hunt. Archaeological evidence from early hunter-gatherer societies, many of which show little evidence of centralized, omnipotent god figures, reveals a world built on reciprocity and mutual aid. Burial sites show care for the infirm and the elderly. Settlements show patterns of shared resources. A Neanderthal with a crippling injury who lived for years did so because someone fed them, someone protected them. This was not done to appease a wrathful deity or to earn a place in an afterlife. It was likely done because the well-being of one was woven into the fabric of the whole. The moral code was the community itself. The thing to do was what strengthened the bonds that allowed everyone to face the brutal world together. Does this ancient, silent cooperation suggest that our ethical compass is not calibrated by heaven, but by the very practical need for each other? In our modern world, this thread of secular morality has been woven into elaborate and conscious philosophies. Humanism, for instance, places its faith not in divine revelation, but in human agency, reason, and empathy. It argues that we can discern what is good and right through our capacity for critical thought and our ability to imagine the suffering and joy of others. It is a morality built on a belief in the potential of humanity itself, in our community, in our future, in our collective ability to build a better world. It is the philosophical backbone for the medic's actions. His should is not dictated from on high. It is negotiated through a million tiny interactions, through literature, through conversation, through the hard-won lessons of history about what causes flourishing and what causes suffering. He acts because he believes in the intrinsic value of the human being in front of him, a value that does not need to be assigned by a creator to be real. If our worth is bestowed by a god, can it be taken away? But if it is inherent, is it not then inalienable? And yet, a shadow of a doubt persists, a whisper that is difficult to ignore. The biological reward is fleeting. The archaeological record also shows evidence of brutal violence. Humanist ideals can seem terribly fragile in the face of raw, primal greed. If there is no final judge, No ultimate cosmic ledger where good is tallied and evil punished. What is to stop the entire precarious structure from collapsing? If a person can act with impunity, if they can secure power, wealth, and safety through cruelty and remain unpunished in any afterlife, is the argument of a warm glow enough? Is empathy a strong enough chain to bind the ambitions of a tyrant? The fear is that without the stick of hell and the carrot of heaven, we are left only with the flawed and corruptible institutions of man, laws that can be twisted, societies that can be corrupted. Can a moral system based solely on our own humanity withstand the darkest temptations of that very same humanity? Perhaps the answer does not lie in reward or punishment at all, but in a capacity even more fundamental. Perhaps the true cradle of goodness is not a calculation of pleasure or fear, but the miraculous, uniquely human faculty of imagination, to truly see the wounded soldier, the atheist. Medic must first see himself in that soldier's place. He must imagine the pain, the terror, the desperate hope for a reprieve from the suffering. This act of imaginative projection, this neurological mirroring, is the raw material of empathy. It is what allows us to break out of the solitary confinement of our own skulls and recognize that the other is also a self, with hopes and fears as vivid and urgent as our own. The thing to do becomes obvious not because a voice commanded it, but because imagination made the other's reality our own. We are not moral because we are promised a reward. We are moral because we cannot, in our mind's eye, do otherwise. We are bound not by divine law, but by the threads of countless imagined connections. But if our morality is born from such a fragile internal faculty, a mere trick of the mind, what does that mean for its power? Is a goodness built on imagination any less real or any less potent than one built on commandment? This line of thinking leads us to a quieter, more domestic scene. A dog cowers, ears flat, eyes darting away, its whole body slumped in an unmistakable posture of guilt. You see it and you know. It has done something wrong. It feels remorse. It understands the moral breach. But does it? Is that look in its eyes a true, internal feeling of guilt for a transgressed law? Or is it simply a sophisticated, evolved reaction to your tone of voice and body language? A preemptive surrender to avoid punishment? The question is deceptively simple, yet it cuts to the very core of what we are. Can there be morality without a mind complex enough to imagine a rule and then imagine itself breaking it? A child watches as their classmate is struck. The small face crumples, a tiny fist clenches against a stomach that feels no blow, and then the tears come. They are not in pain, not physically. Yet something real and sharp is happening within them. They are feeling an echo, a ghost of a sensation that belongs to another. This is not learned behavior. It is a raw, unfiltered response. It is the first primal spark of a uniquely human capacity, the profound and unsettling ability to not just see, but to feel the pain of another being. This invisible thread connecting self and other is the silent foundation upon which societies are built and moral worlds are constructed. But where does this thread begin? Is it a biological command, a cultural lesson, or something more elusive, woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human? The science behind this echo points to a remarkable neural architecture hidden within the folds of our brains. They are called mirror neurons, a discovery that itself reads like a scientific parable. Researchers studying the motor cortex of macaque monkeys noticed something extraordinary. A particular neuron would fire when the monkey performed a specific action, like reaching for a peanut. This was expected. The revelation came when that same neuron fired with an identical electrical signature, as the monkey simply watched another monkey or even a human perform the very same action. It was as if the brain, in its private darkness, was practicing the movements it witnessed, rehearsing the world outside. In humans, this mirroring system is vastly more complex and sophisticated. It doesn't just mirror actions, it seems to mirror intentions, sensations, and emotions. When you see someone sip a bitter coffee and grimace, your own taste processing regions might flicker with a shadow of that distaste. When you watch a dancer leap, your motor cortex doesn't just observe, it participates in a silent internal ballet. This neural circuitry is the biological cradle of empathy. It allows us to step for a fleeting moment into the subjective experience of another. It translates sight into feeling, observation into a shared internal event. We are wired, it seems, for connection. But is this wiring a flawless gift, or a primitive tool that requires careful calibration? Does this biological mirror simply show us the truth, or does it sometimes distort it, reflecting only what is familiar and close to us? If our modern brains hold this mirror, can we find its reflection in the ashes of ancient fires? Archaeology cannot unearth a feeling. It cannot carbon date compassion or excavate a moment of shared grief from the silent soil. The inner lives of our ancestors are a continent lost to time. Yet we find their footprints at the water's edge. We see them in the cave paintings of Lascaux, where the artistry captures not just the form of the bison, but its vitality, its motion, its essence, a testament to an observer who could see the world from behind the eyes of another creature. We find it in a 30,000-year-old burial site, where a Neanderthal was carefully laid to rest upon a bed of flowers, pollen still clinging to the earth after millennia. This was not merely disposal. This was a ritual, an act that speaks of loss that is felt collectively, of a respect that transcends the individual's death. We see it in the healed fractures of ancient bones, severe injuries that would have been a death sentence without weeks or months of protection, feeding, and care provided by others. These are the silent testimonies. They do not speak of mirror neurons, but they whisper of a community bound by something more than mere survival. They suggest a shared emotional landscape, a capacity to see a wound and not just turn away, to feel a loss that is not one's own. Is this the origin of our morality? Not in a divine law, but in the practical, gritty necessity of caring for one another in a brutal world? Did our ethics begin not with a commandment, but with a compress applied to a fevered brow? This capacity, once a silent undercurrent of human survival, has now been brought into the light of modern consciousness. Today, empathy is not just an instinct, it is an ideal. It is a subject of best-selling books, a module in corporate training programs, a cornerstone of psychological therapy, and a stated goal of educational systems worldwide. We are taught to see things from their perspective, to walk a mile in their shoes. It is held up as the antidote to prejudice, the glue for a fractured society, the essential psychological skill for the 21st century. Modern morality, in many ways, has become a project of expanding the circle of our empathy, from the family to the tribe to the nation, and now, theoretically, to all of humanity and even to other species. We are encouraged to feel for the refugee, the victim of a disaster an ocean away, the endangered animal in a distant forest. This is empathy engineered, scaled up, and weaponized for good. We strive to make our internal mirror as wide as the world itself. But can a feeling truly be taught? And if we succeed in feeling everything, do we risk feeling nothing at all, numbed by the sheer scale of suffering we are asked to internalize? This ambition bumps against a stubborn and uncomfortable truth about the nature of empathy itself. The mirror in our mind is not a perfect, impartial observer. It is a biased and selective instrument. It reflects most clearly those who look like us, think like us, and live near us. We wince for the child who falls on our street, but a statistic about children falling in a distant country is just that, a statistic. Our neural mirror fogs over with distance and difference. This is the dark paradox of empathy. It can be the engine of profound altruism, but also the fuel for brutal tribalism. We can feel the pain of our in-group so acutely that it justifies rage and violence against the perceived out-group that caused it. Empathy can be a spotlight, illuminating one suffering individual with blinding intensity, while leaving 1,000 others in the darkness. A single, identifiable victim tugs at our heartstrings and our wallets, while 1 million anonymous ones fail to trigger the same response. So if empathy is so flawed, so capricious, and easily manipulated, can it truly be the bedrock of morality? Is feeling another's pain enough to make us good? Perhaps the project of a moral life is not merely to feel more, but to build a framework of ethics that operates even when feeling fails. Perhaps true morality begins not in the warm, instinctive surge of empathy for the familiar, but in the cooler, more deliberate application of principle for the stranger. It is the conscious choice to act with kindness, with fairness, with justice, even, and especially, when the mirror neurons are silent. It is the intellectual understanding that another's suffering matters, even if you cannot feel its echo in your own bones. It is the acceptance of a norm that transcends the self, a commitment to a rule that applies to all, a covenant we uphold even with those we do not understand and will never meet. Empathy might be the spark, but it is not the entire fire. It is the invitation to care, but not the guarantee of right action. So we are left with a question that hums in the space between biology and philosophy. If we could not feel the pain of others, would we still be compelled to ease it? And for those who seem to feel it so easily, does that profound connection grant them something more? Not just a clearer moral compass, but perhaps a longer, healthier life to wield it.